This is the best, most comprehensive video on cold calling on YouTube. I worked my ass off over the past few years, personally prospecting 11 of the top B2B tech sales experts who have a collective 140 years of cold calling and sales experience. I am serious. That's no joke. They've advised and sold at some of the best companies in tech sales like Oracle, Snowflake, Salesforce, Google, Zoom, SalesLoft, Gong, and many others. Some of these experts are even best-selling authors. These experts include Jeb Blount, the author of Fanatical Prospecting, Mark Hunter, one of the best keynote speakers in B2B sales, Jason Bay, Josh Braun, Kyle Vamvouris, Richard Harris, Will Aitken, corporate bro, and real-world sellers in the trenches with us making calls who have also built large social media presences like Trent Dressel at Deel.com, JC Pollard at Gong, and Connor Murray at Oracle. This video is going to give you everything you need and then some to become the top cold caller at your B2B tech company. We're going to talk about cold calling mindset, cold calling productivity hacks, and everything from start to finish when it comes to executing a cold call, like opening the first 30 seconds, piquing the prospect's curiosity, framing value, and you're going to want to stay to the end for multiple objection handling examples and how to firmly set the meeting. My challenge to you is to not only watch this video once, but watch it twice, maybe even 3 times. Take notes and adapt the frameworks to your own cold calling style and the context of selling at the company that you work at. Then pick up the phone and make more calls, because we all know that sales is a numbers game. Make more calls, build more pipeline, and put more cash in your pocket. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more videos like these to help you start and grow your tech sales career. All right, let's get to the good stuff.
The largest deal that I sold in my 20s and 30s was because I picked up the phone and I called a guy, and I just happened to get the environmental safety and health officer of this company, large company. He just answered the phone. And I talked to him and set an appointment and went and sat down with him. It took 2 years to close the deal, but it was the biggest deal in my company's history, biggest deal of my life. It changed my life. It was that big. So yeah, I mean, you know, I wish I could make it easier. 100 other people could have interrupted the guy. I'm the one that did it. My go-to was the phone. And by the way, the sales teams that I work with now, a lot of them are asynchronous. So they're spending all their times on email, all the time in social media. And I typically come in and we start with the phone. And they're stunned at how many appointments they can set if they actually pick the damn thing up and dial somebody. When people say nobody answers the phone, it's just bullshit. People answer the phone. And that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with email, because there's not. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with sending a text message, because there's not. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with showing up on someone's doorstep, because there's not, or hitting them up on direct messaging on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp. All of those things work. Like, you should do all those things. But the easiest, fastest way to either qualify or set an appointment is to have a conversation with another human being who actually knows the information. And the easiest way to do that is interrupt them by phone. I don't get caught up in this cold calling. I mean, cold call, certainly I call someone who doesn't know who I am and they're not expecting me. That's a cold call. But calling an inbound lead, it's a cold call, because you're interrupting someone's day. I mean, we've all called inbound leads. You call them up and they're like, who are you and what do you want? You're like, you've just filled out my form. Like, you just downloaded something. You just said you were interested. You're calling a referral. It's still a cold call, because they're not expecting you. You're interrupting someone. So the point is that there's somebody sitting at their phone somewhere and they're not expecting your call and you're calling them. That's called an interruption. Now, if you send them an email, it's an interruption. If you send them a direct message, it's an interruption. If you connect with them on social media, it's an interruption. Different levels of interruption. If you show up in their workspace, it's an interruption. You send them a text message, it's an interruption. If you send them a smoke signal, it's a freaking interruption. You're gonna interrupt people. Our job is to interrupt people and get their attention. And nobody wants to do that. And because when you interrupt people, they don't typically go, thank you for interrupting me. I really enjoyed that. I don't like to be interrupted. You don't like to be interrupted. I mean, that's the truth. So, but if you don't interrupt people, you're going to end up with skinny kids. You're going to have no income. You're going to have a boss up your rear end, and you're probably going to get fired. So our job is to interrupt. I wish I could make it easier. I can't. I don't have an easy button for it. I can just tell you the truth. And the truth is, if you want to sell more, you have to get good at interrupting people.
Most people have a high degree of agreeability, meaning they want to please other people. But the people that are most successful actually are willing to be disagreeable so that they can get what they want, because that you have to swim against stream in a way. So when you're on the cold call, you're calling a busy executive that does not want to speak with you in that moment. And in the real world, when you're interacting with people, you will face moments of tension when you're up against someone who doesn't want to comply what you want them to do. So being willing to lean into that and not flee, not fight, not get overly emotional, and just say, hey, here's what I want, and let's do it. And then that's, I think it's a way to get more of what you want out of life.
I think too, as AI gets better and as companies start to crack down on the amount of emails people can send, I think cold calling is about to get more and more and more important. And I think it's going to be the true differentiator for successful SDRs.
Yeah.
Get really good at it. Like figure out how to get really good at it.
I remember a VP at a credit union. I called him 47 times over 2 years.
Yeah.
47 times. He even answered the phone a few times throughout. He agreed to my meeting one time, like a year before. But I'd get him on the phone. He'd act like he had no idea who I was. One time, he's like, I'll take your meeting. And we set up a meeting. He's like, hey, add Glenda to the call. Glenda is the director who I'd called 34 times. She also didn't want any part of what I was doing. We get on that first meeting. Keep in mind, I called them both collectively over 70 times over 2 years. These are executives at a big credit union. And on that first call, I make sure to make a joke. I say, guys, I know I've reached out to you a lot, but I really appreciate you taking the time. And they tried to play it off and act like they're just like, let's stay cool with it. And they ended up buying. Literally 2 months later, they bought a 3-year, $60,000 TCV license, so average $20,000 recurring revenue a year. And then the VP ended up retiring a month after. But I think he respected that I had been so persistent that he's like, let me get this guy in and then I'll retire. And that was it. He literally set us up in the system and then retired.
That says a lot.
That says a lot. He was such a cool guy, but he wasn't very cool the 2 years trying to get a contact with him. But the point is, you're not going to offend someone by doing your job. The way I think about it is, it's almost, and I sort of learned this from Alex Hormozy, but I also had viewed it similarly. But cold calling in particular in sales, it's like playing the lottery, in which you can keep playing, but you have no risk of losing. What is your downside if you make too many calls? Oh, you spend an extra hour making calls today. Well, what is your upside? You'll hit the jackpot by getting a meeting that can change the trajectory of your life and your career.
Agreed.
It's like playing the slot machine. So that's how I view it. It's gamification. It's like gambling, but that is a productive vice to have, opposed to gambling on some sport game, placing teasers, waking up Monday morning in a hole, worrying about paying your bookie Tuesday, and you got to hit the right bet Monday Night Football. So that's another story for another day.
Yeah.
But it very much is like gambling, doing sales. Unlimited upside.
What has cold calling taught you in your broader life?
Learning a skill that you can be paid for is great. I realized early on, cold calling, specifically prospecting, would be the foundation for a successful sales career. So I dove headfirst all into cold calling. I made a lot of cold calls. It allowed me to make money, which then allowed me to earn different freedoms in my life. But specifically to learning the cold calling, I do believe from a communication standpoint, it's increased my confidence and my ability to articulate a message, succinct and concise. I can speak direct and say exactly what needs to be said. Because what I learned early on, listening to other people, is the best people in the beginning, when I wasn't very good, they were able to say more with less words. So I now am always thinking through that perspective of, how do I communicate what I want to say in as few words as possible?
If you have the ability to help someone, you have an obligation to them to reach out to them. Now, let's unpack what I mean by this. An example I share, you probably heard me share the story. If I had problems, and I have plenty of problems, my kids tell me all the time, Dad, you have got a lot of problems. And if I knew that you, Chris, could help me, I would want you to reach out to me. I would want you to help me. If I found out later on that you did not help me when you could have, I'd be upset at you. You see, we do customers a favor when we reach out to them. Now let's unpack this further, because it doesn't mean just randomly calling people, randomly emailing people. No, you know who your market is. You know who are the types of people you can help. And that's where you focus your time and effort. That's where you spend your day. That's where you spend your time. And those are people you can help. So you owe it to them. When years ago, I too was afraid of prospecting. That simple line has been ingrained in my brain for 30 years. And it has made all the difference in the world. Let me share with you my definition of sales, which is also my definition of leadership. It's helping others see and achieve what they didn't think was possible. Think about that. You know, you see that in a great leader. You see that in a great salesperson. So I'm calling you up because I want to help you see and achieve what you didn't think was possible. Boom. Boom. I love doing that.
Well, that lights me up. If you can't tell, look, the sun's shining on my
There
face.
you go, there you
Mark,
go.
what are the chances the
Man,
freaking
I'm
sun is
getting-
coming right through my window right
yeah.
now?
I hope you think when you're cold calling someone that whatever you're offering is valuable enough where, like, I never had the feeling where I was asking someone a favor by trying to book a meeting. I believed I was doing them a favor by exposing them to Gong earlier than they would have been exposed to Gong if I had not called them.
Mm.
And that creates a very different tonality on a cold call. I'm not like begging for your time. I'm not like selfishly trying to steal some of your calendar. I'm like, dude, I'm helping you out right now because you're going to want this shit. And even if you don't fully believe that, try to manufacture that feeling as much as you can and try to have that tone on a call where you're not some like SDR who's just trying to get a meeting on the books. Like, hey, could we please meet for like an hour with my sales director, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, it's like, dude, I have something that's going to blow your fucking mind. You want to see this. It's going to help. Let's figure out a time to meet. Like, that's a completely different perspective to have on a call.
JC, you talked about not making compromises in life. And one compromise that I encourage the audience to not make is being at a company where you don't believe in the product. So if they find that, okay, I'm at a spot where I actually don't believe in this, I can't even manufacture belief, maybe it's a sign to make a pivot to whatever your Gong might look like, you know?
Yeah, well, maybe it's Gong for you and hit me up. I get a referral bonus. So
Come on, guys, let's get JC paid.
You're an SDR. You talk to more of their role than they do. I mean, now that for a second, if you cold call CMOs and you've been an SDR for 6 months, how many CMOs have you talked to? Way more than any given CMO that you speak with, most likely. So in a way, you do understand the role a bit better than they do. Maybe not understand the day-to-day, but you understand this high-level challenge and what they care about. And you know a lot about this problem that you solve because you're working at a company that solves it. So there's no reason why after a couple of months of cold calling, you shouldn't view yourself as the authority.
So a lot of reps, they struggle with two mindsets when they're new, and they're you can almost consider them one. The first one is they feel like they're bothering prospects when they call them, or they feel like that what they're doing is not actually valuable to prospects. Like they're almost wasting their time, and they're not confident that what they're asking for, which is a meeting on their calendar, is actually valuable to the customer. And it ends up coming across in their language and in their tonality. So examples of this would be when it comes time to ask for the meeting. If they feel like they're bothering the prospect or they're not confident in why they're reaching out, when they ask for the meeting, they'll say something like, great, if possible, I'd love to set up some time next week if you're interested. They put on these little caveats like, I'd love to, if you're possibly free, or if you're possibly interested, I'd love to set up some time. And I try and coach the mindset into them that you're actually valuable to prospects. Like what we're doing here, like in my case at Oracle, or insert other company, you're selling market leading solutions. All of these prospects have problems. They should be meeting with their account reps at all these various companies. And like you're their point of contact, reaching out, trying to make this easy for them. They probably should be taking a meeting with you, and your company wouldn't have a position in the market that it does if its solutions didn't help customers. So I try and coach into reps like, what we're doing is valuable and that we're not bothering prospects, and replace passive language with more assumptive language with a downward inflecting tone. So instead of saying, if possible, I'd love to set up some time next week, say, great, I'm looking to set up some time next week just to get introduced and aligned with your priorities going forward. How's your calendar look next week on Wednesday or Thursday? It's a lot more assumptive. And I've seen reps like change nothing else about their cold call script besides that, like replace the passive language and the upward inflecting tone with more assumptive language, like I'm looking to set up some time, or let's set up some time. Like you're expecting this to happen with that downward inflecting tone. Their results change night and day. Like it's crazy. That's probably the quickest fix I would give most SDRs, but it comes from the mindset. Like, yeah, that's a technique, but I try and have it come across in their mindset that you should be expecting these meetings to happen. Like, because what we're doing is actually helping these people. We're not wasting their time or bothering them.
How can people who are a little bit disconnected from that true power that's innately within them, a little disconnected from their authenticity because of nerves, which is natural, how can they get in touch with that authenticity? Maybe you have a mindset shift or some high level perspective on how to tap into that.
Yeah, I have an exercise for people to try. No one will do it, but if you do, I'll be very proud of you. Here's the exercise. Get like a notebook and a piece of paper or pencil. Or pen, whatever. Grab something. Okay. Then go out into the wilderness, not the real wilderness. Go into the city. Yeah. It involves leaving your current location, which is why nobody does this. But you actually leave your house, go to like a mall, go to downtown Austin, right? Go to San Francisco. I do this with every team I run. And you get your little clipboard and your pen, you walk out there, you approach strangers on the street, and you ask them to write down their first impression of you. You just walk up and say, hey, real quick, I'm doing an exercise here. Do you mind writing down your first impression of me?
Wow. Then
you do that and try to get as many as you can in whatever your time window is. And if you do this in a group, you'll find that some people are a little slower to start. Other people are much faster to start. You know, everyone's a little bit different depending on their comfort level with approaching strangers. Here's what happened. And I did this exercise when I was 21, and it completely changed my life. At that time for me, I was in a pretty dark place. I was very depressed, and I could barely approach people on the street and ask them to write their first impression of me. And at the end, what you'll find when you read through it, and this is what I found, is people generally have nice things to say about their first impression with you. And furthermore, you realize that not everyone's noticing you like the way you think they would notice you, right? A lot of times we're our own harshest critics, or maybe every time. So the exercise you come out of gives you a really strong sense of confidence, because you realize that generally people have a positive impression of you, and all of the stuff that prevents you from either making the call or being confident on a cold call doesn't actually matter. And for me, it was an overnight transformation. I was much more confident after doing that exercise than before. And for the teams that I've taken through it, for the people who needed an exercise like that, it is very effective for.
I think one of the first things to talk about is what you can do physically, like the behavior that you can take. That's probably the easiest one, because it's literally as simple as, for a lot of people, instead of sitting down when you make cold calls, stand up. I happen to be a pacer too. So if I'm on the phone, I'm gonna be pacing back and forth, because I just get into like a little rhythm that way, right? Another thing too would be doing something active prior to your cold calling block. And that could just be walking around your block, like get your heart rate up and get like your energy level up. Those are very, very simple things to do. In terms of like the mental stuff, I already shared one, like the judo that you can play in your head.
Yeah.
And talking to yourself, that is really hard to do. I think the more simple thing to do is a couple things. I'm a big fan of UFC, and John Jones, he's fighting at heavyweight right now, but it was a big deal. He was about to move from 205 pounds to 265. And he was going to fight this guy, Francis Ngannou, who's like a human-sized bull.
Yep.
And in the interview, what really stuck out to me is they asked him, "Are you afraid of this guy?" And he said, "You know what? I kind of am, actually. But I've come to grips with the worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario is that I go in there and I get knocked out, or maybe he breaks my jaw. And I'm okay with that. I'm at peace with that being an outcome." And if you think about all of the things you do in sales, the consequences of failure are not that high.
Yeah, they're
They
not
really
that
aren't.
bad. I don't know if I'd be okay with a broken jaw. Like,
You're not going to get punched in the face, probably, at least through the phone,
yeah,
for
you
sure.
can't. It's impossible.
So what's the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario is someone hangs up on you, they get a little angry, whatever. And it happens way less often than you would think, you know? So I think that's one thing. The other thing is to change your goal. So to get really practical with cold calling, the objective with a cold call when you pick up the phone and dial is not to book a meeting. Like, that's not your objective. Your objective is to have genuine conversation. I don't even know if I want to meet with you, Chris, if you pick up the phone. You may not even be in a situation where it even makes sense for us to chat and to connect further. So my objective is, how can I just break through this like buyer? The thing that buyers do is they run away and ignore salespeople. The thing that salespeople do is, they're really persistent and bug people and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of like what we're known for. That's the dynamic between the two, right? The way that you can break through that dynamic is like just being really human on the call and having genuine conversation. When someone slams a door in your face or you make a cold call in tech sales, right? What you might be feeling physically in that moment, the emotion you might be experiencing is what you shared you were experiencing right before this. And I experienced the same thing before when I'm interviewing someone, if that makes you feel better, where
It's
you
interesting.
experience anxiety and nerves, right? Maybe even a little bit of fear, depending on who it is. How you think about that, the thoughts associated with that feeling, you can tell yourself a lot of different stories, right? You can tell yourself, oh God, I'm about to interview Chris and he's a really big deal and God, I might mess it up and that's going to be really embarrassing. Or it's, hey, Chris sounds like a really interesting person. I'm super excited to get to know him, right? It's the same with cold calling. You can go into that thinking, oh God, it's going to go really bad. They're going to be really irritated that I called them. Or you can look at it like I'm going to make their day. And that will drive your behavior one way or the other to make the call or not make the call. So I think looking at the relationship between your thoughts, your emotions, and then your behavior, those are interdependent things. The more you can practice this and notice that, the more likely you are to be able to deal with call reluctance or nerves or anxiety. And the last piece of advice I would have is, I was speaking at an SKO earlier this year. There's 500 people there, dude. That's the biggest live audience, like in person.
That is a good size audience.
Yeah, big audience. And I remember they were kind of introducing me, and I'm just standing up at the front looking over at the audience. My heart is just like, dude, I can just feel my heart beating in my chest, And what I always remind myself in those moments is that every single person that gets up on this stage is feeling something very similar. Like, that's a very normal feeling. And then that's my feelings, right? And then the thought that I'm reminding myself of is I'm validating essentially how I feel and normalizing it and psyching myself up a bit, right? So that would be my other piece of advice, is to really, whatever you're feeling, try not to change how you feel. It's very hard to control that. What you do have a lot more control over is your behavior and how you think and your thoughts.
In the middle of the book, there's a chapter on confidence. And he talks about how professional golfers who don't have confidence will tell him, well, the only way I can get confidence is to go win a tournament. And he's like, no, confidence isn't gotten that way. Like you certainly, if you're winning, you feel more confident, right? If I have a full pipeline, I feel more confident because with a full pipeline, I'm going to close more. So number one would be fill up your pipeline. But he said that confidence is a choice. Like you choose to be confident. You make that intentional choice that you're going to feel a particular way, because the feeling of confidence or insecurity that's all here. Like it didn't happen outside of you. It happened inside of you. So number one is choose to be confident. Like you just got to just put yourself in a situation where I'm just going to come off as being confident. That's simple. I'm not saying that's easy. I'm just saying that he's right. It is a choice that you make as an individual. Now, the other way you do it is you have to fill up your pipeline. You have to be willing to do the dials. I mean, you have to wake up in the morning and say, you know what? I got 8 hours a day. I'm going to make $50 an hour until the end of the day. That's what I'm going to do. And then you have to have faith. And this is the hard thing, right? The hard thing is teaching people that if you do that every day, faith that by doing that, you're going to get outcomes, and those outcomes are going to be positive. That's what you have to do. And the problem with people not feeling confident is they say, I don't feel confident, therefore I'm not doing the activity. But it's the activity, it's the sales endorphins, it's the going through the process, right? That leads to confidence. But I know this sounds weird, and I was reading this book and he was writing this. I'm like, he's so right about this. We think that confidence is something that happens to us.
Ooh.
But confidence is something that happens in us. And the things that happen in us are completely our decision.
When you cold call a lot, you also realize that people don't remember you at all.
Yeah.
So when I was an SDR, I was cold calling salons and spas. And you'd think, like, I have a pretty recognizable voice. You'd think that you'd realize, oh, this person's called me again. I would call people 3 days later after they said not interested and hung up on me, and they would not recognize me. I've had situations where I called them later that day and was able to book a meeting.
Whenever I'm cold calling, when I'm having fun and not taking it so seriously, I get like buckets more results from it. I have better conversations. Now, when I go into it afraid, anxious, feeling like I need it to work, feeling like I'm desperate, it's the opposite. So although it's easier to say when you've already got your needs met, just thinking in a way that's kind of detaching yourself a lot from the outcome, thinking, you know what, it's not that deep. We're just making cold calls. We're having a good time. Heck, I'm quite a big fan of self-depreciating on cold calls, because if I'm making fun of myself, it lowers the prospect's guard and they're actually willing to have a straight conversation with me. Because a lot of the time, prospects, they won't tell you the truth. They'll lie to you because it's easier and quicker to get rid of you. When you come at someone with your guard down, they lower theirs as well. One of the easiest ways to show someone you have your guard down is just cracking the joke, being self-depreciating. And, you know, I've noticed British people are very good at that, probably because we were making fun of our mates from a very early age. But I found that's worked really well for me. And then that way it's just like, hey, the worst that can happen isn't even that bad. No one could say anything worse to me than I've probably said to myself at some point.
If you can genuinely have a good time cold calling, I always treated everybody like a puzzle. Can I figure it out? And if I didn't do it, it wasn't because I was bad. I mean, sometimes it's like I did something stupid. I was like, that didn't really work. But for the most part, it's just like I didn't figure out how the pieces were supposed to go together for that person. Doesn't mean I'm going to win everybody. Actually, funny enough, you never win most of the people you talk to. So by the nature of the action, it's inefficient. You are fighting for percentage points, small ones. And if I can just get 1% higher conversion, that's a big, big impact for me. So you treat everybody like a puzzle. And you're like, I'm trying to figure out like what's the right way to get somebody like this to convert. What happens if somebody says X to me? How can I respond? What's the best way to respond to that? And you keep playing around, you keep experimenting. It makes it a little bit more fun. And then you start to figure it out. And then you can have fun. Like we used to play games. Here's another activity for people to do. See if you can work the word pufferfish into a cold call. Sounds wild, but all of a sudden you'll be focused on a completely different thing. You won't be focused on booking a meeting. You're going to be focused on how do I get the word pufferfish to make sense
That's unreal.
in this cold call. And what you find is sometimes those are your best cold calls, because you actually were able to work it in. We used to do these little games where we would pick a word, pumpernickel or whatever it is, right? We would pick a word and try to like incorporate a weird word into our cold calls. And some of my best cold calls were like that. When you sit down to cold call, if you call, email, you're going to achieve a lot less than if you just did an hour of dedicated calling, an hour of dedicated emailing. So if you can be more effective cold calling in the same amount of time that you're cold emailing with personalization, then you should just cold call instead. Like, why are we personalizing cold emails unless it's worth our time compared to other activities we could.
Interesting.
So I let the data drive a lot of the decision making. In some industries, personalized cold email is going to be a lot more effective than cold calling. Not always. Usually it's not, by the way. So every minute I'm not cold calling is a minute that I'm doing a different activity. And it might feel good to send personalized emails because, I don't know, the people on LinkedIn have decided that that's how email should be done, it doesn't necessarily make it the right decision. And I was debating somebody about doing research before cold calls. I said, it's not necessary. I don't need to look up anything about somebody. I just need their name and their title. And if I understand the problem that we're solving, I'm going to be able to have a fruitful conversation. They strongly disagreed with that. So I said, okay, well, how much should you research? How much time do you spend researching before a cold call? They said, 3 to 5 minutes. So I did the math and I said, let's just take 3 minutes as an example. And I modeled it out completely the same with 3 minutes of research and then, or with 3 minutes between each call versus I think I get 30 seconds in between each call. So I didn't even do, in reality, there's no seconds, but I mean, you can call almost instantly, but I was like, let's just say there's 30 seconds between each call versus 3 minutes in between each call because that person's researching. The conversion on a connect would have to be double in order to justify the 3 minutes to before every single call. Double. So that means if you're not impacting your phone conversion rate by 2x, it didn't make sense doing the research beforehand. But it feels good. Oh, I know the person that I'm calling more. You don't know anything. I'm going to ask them everything I need to know anyway. Like what? All of a sudden, like what do I gain? I get to now say like, oh, I saw on LinkedIn. No one cares about that. Hey, I generally talk to people. They tell me they struggle with these things. Which one resonates with you? I'm asking the same question, So anyway, and what I find often for most organizations, they should kind of just be cold calling. And they so badly want SDRs. Don't even get me started about lists. I don't think SDR should create lead lists. I think the lead list should be created by leadership and given to the SDR. We can go down that rabbit hole too. But I'll look at a company and you look at the data and it's like, hey, this team should just be cold calling a bunch. And until we have this cold calling muscle really working well, let's not add any other channel.
I'm a game time player, Chris. When the lights come on, I show up. I don't like to over prepare.
Okay.
Because what I learned early on is if I structure out all these great medic questions, if I do all this research, it's helpful and I'll do that to an extent. But it's similar to a fight. Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. So if you've got this planned out route of questions I'm going to ask, all of a sudden your customer will say something different. Yeah. You won't even have heard them because you're focused on what you're going to ask next, and then you're off track, and then you're sort of playing catch up. So I think about this in terms of preparation outside the office. I believe your business life is a reflection of your personal life. So me, I'm focused on getting 8 hours of sleep, drinking a ton of water, stretching my body. I don't watch TV. I don't drink. I don't gamble. I don't do any drugs. I don't have toxic relationships for the most part. And I literally, as I was telling you before this, I literally just have a mattress in my apartment because I'm focused on living as simple as possible. There is nothing that's going to upset me outside the office so that when I'm showing up day to day, I'm there focused, ready to perform at my peak ability. And what I've observed in a lot of people I've worked with is they have vices that actually hold them back so that when they show up in the office, man, I got lost in that show last night. And they'll walk in and say, man, I'm tired today. Man, I don't feel good today. And I'll say, well, what happened? And they'll say, well, I stayed up late last night. Okay, you didn't get enough sleep. So how are you going to perform at your peak level and compete with someone like me over the course of a 50-year time horizon? You're eventually going to reach a point where you plateau. So I structure my life in a way where I'm always preparing so that I can show up every day. Some days I'll work out for 15 minutes, but I'm going to work out every day. So I know that I can sustain that level of activity. So it's all about staying ready. I'm always in shape. I tell people I'm ready to run a marathon today because I always stay in shape. People love this insight that I'm about to share with you. Most people are worried about picking up the phone, and the fear of what could happen is worse than what actually happens. So most people will sit there, similar to me when I first started cold calling. I remember in the early days, I'd be sitting there, I'd be looking at my Salesforce page, I'd be looking at the company website, I'd be looking at the prospect LinkedIn page, and I'd be prepared. And then I remember the SDR next to me who had been there 9 months longer. She said, hey, Trent, what are you doing? I said, I'm preparing. She said, no, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be making calls. And then that's when it clicked in my head where I realized all that matters is actually making the call. And in order for me to be more successful, I need to press call, and then I will figure out what to say while it's ringing. Some people at this point will say, well, if I'm calling enterprise accounts, I got 2 accounts. I need to make sure to do my prep. Everyone's situation's different, but if you're doing prospecting, make the call and figure out what to say while it's ringing. And in order to remove that paralysis by analysis, the insight is obsess over the process and emotionally detach from the results. So it doesn't matter if you actually set the meeting, and it really doesn't matter if you don't set the meeting. All that matters is you make the calls, you make the daily inputs that will lead to your success. It's all about just making the call, so you can extrapolate that out to really most scenarios in life. Asking the girl out at the bar for her phone, or making the introduction, or giving a public speech. Obsess over the process of doing, but emotionally detach from the results, because that's where most people get lost, is they want the result, but then they get lost in between the mechanics of the how. Don't worry about that. Just start doing it, and you will figure out what to do along the way. And the way I like to describe it, really to bring this to life, is most people would agree they think pretty clearly in the shower, right? You're pretty meditative. You're a little bit more creative.
Peaceful state.
You're like, I'm kind of rubbing some soap on my body. The water's
What
really
kind of soap?
warm. I got that coconut. No,
Okay,
it's
right.
it feels good. And that's how I approach cold calling. I'm very much in a meditative state. I'm sitting there completely indifferent, unrattled. I don't really care what's happening. I'm just sitting there. I'm pressing calls. I'm not checking Instagram feed. I don't even have social media on my phone. I'm just sitting there making the calls. If I get someone on the phone, then I'm going to execute, and it's scripted. I'm not even thinking about it. It's second nature. It's intuitive. And when people are worried about, oh, I got the script, I got to make sure I sound right, oh, I hope they don't tell me no, that's when it's not intuitive. And that's when it's very mechanical and it's robotic and it just doesn't work. So you got to get out of your own head and just sit there. And who cares if you set the meeting or not? What, are you going to get fired? I got fired. It's not the worst thing to happen.
Yeah.
What's the worst thing that's going to happen? So someone 1,000 miles away is going to tell you, not interested. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Bye. I'll call you again in a month.
Yeah.
When it would be bad weather or when it would be raining, I knew people would come in a bit later than normal. I knew people would come in and say, man, that traffic getting in here sucked. And I'd be thinking in the back of my head, I'm making 100 calls today just because other people are going to take their foot off the gas because they're using the weather as an excuse today. So you can extrapolate the weather out to all sorts of different circumstances. Oh, I grew up in a challenged household. Parents got divorced. Oh, I got fired. Life is so unfair. Or you can use these circumstances as fuel to motivate you to be more successful. And that's how I choose to look at life. And I've always viewed my X factor as someone that's willing to do the things that other people don't want to do. So what does that look like in an actual sales career? That's okay. Well, people don't like making cold calls. So I realized early on, cold calling's never going away. AI isn't going to come in and make my calls for me. Maybe it's going to take my job, but if I'm great at cold calling, I'm not going anywhere. So I decided I'm going to get as good at cold calling as I possibly can. And that's just one example of controlling the controllables, because my first month as a sales development rep, I was bottom of the leaderboard out of 34 people. Imagine that. You're starting to question, is sales for me? Do I actually want to be doing this? Do I belong here? Should I retreat? Should I move back home? Should I get in a less competitive industry that's not going to require as much of me? I realized in that moment, all I could do was decide to outwork the people around me.
You have to really want to be good at it, and then you have to pour hours in, especially early. Like, I remember when I first got hired at Gong as an SDR, every time I would work out, every time I'd go for a walk, I didn't listen to music for like 6 months because I was just listening to SDR cold calls.
Dude, respect, man.
That's all I listened to.
Wow.
And there were a few like Sam Kozabrodsky, who still works at Gong, excited to get back and see him soon. I picked a few SDRs that I wanted to emulate that had a similar tone to me, and I listened to every call they made. This is also like a shameless plug for Gong, but I had this filter set up where every single time a cold call was successfully booked, like a meeting was booked off a cold call, I had to go to this playlist I had in Gong.
Wow.
I listened to every single, not my whole SDR tenure, like when I was early, every single meeting booked, I listened to that cold call, and I wanted to learn from that cold call and emulate that cold call. So just have this like insatiable hunger to learn from
You're
the
like
best.
a professional athlete that's watching the game tape.
Yeah, just way less cool.
Yeah. Anyways, continue.
Yeah, and paid way less too. But yeah, that's the first thing is like just decide that you're going to get really good at it and put as much effort and energy into it as you want to do.
They say sales is a numbers game. And if you decide to increase your top of funnel inputs, daily activities, that will lead to more success no matter who you are, no matter what you sell. If you make more calls, if you send more emails, if you are able to generate more leads, it will result in more success for you, guaranteed. It's very simple.
Because I used to get asked a lot by SDRs, like, what are you doing differently? Like, how are you doing so much better than me? And I got to the point where I would share my screen and I'd pull up a graphic of calls made and calls listened to. I'm like, I made 4 times more calls than you this week, and I listened to twice as many calls. Why are you asking me for a secret recipe? Like,
Dude.
Call more. So yeah, step 1, make a lot of calls.
I came in with what I would say is the right attitude. Like, I was working hard. I took training seriously.
Yeah.
I was watching the YouTube videos. I read all the books, like everything you could do to prepare, I did. But it's when you first get on the phone, it's like, you just can't really prepare for it. It's different when you get your first live call and the prospect says hello. And you're like, okay, yeah, doesn't matter what, if I read the Challenger sale, like you're on the spot here. So no, I got off to a very slow start. I think the first 6 weeks, I was like the last person on my team to book a meeting. I was making the dials. I felt awkward. I didn't have a process in place that I use now that I talk about a lot. And it kind of formulated. So I did go through my period of struggle for sure. But then when things started to click, they clicked fast. And then you kind of go from this mindset of like, you're kind of nervous every time you click dial, and you almost have this little voice in your head that's saying like, don't pick up. Even though your job is to book the meeting, you're almost so nervous about what's going to happen. But then once you know what to do and you have a process down, that flips from saying don't pick up, and then you're like, please pick up, because you know there's a good chance you'll book the meeting and hopefully get an opportunity out of it, which translates to money in your pocket.
Yeah, I've seen some great posts even about SDRs. I saw one a couple months ago that they were behind on their numbers and they just upped their volume, and eventually quantity turned to quality. And obviously you want to be thoughtful and prepared, but there's something to be said for taking action, I think, to your point.
I think it's the same with any skill in life. Repetition breeds success. Like, I could read 20 different books on how to ride a bike or how to ice skate, because I don't know how to ice skate. But if you put me out on the ice, even after reading all those, I'm still going to slip and fall on my ass, right? That knowledge is helpful, but only to a certain point. You need to apply that knowledge. You need to make the mistakes yourself. You need to get comfortable, and then you'll be able to ice skate without worrying about falling your butt and bruising your coccyx. Yeah.
No one likes the bruised coccyx.
No one likes bruised coccyx. Oh boy, every time you sit down.
In baseball especially, and in sales, you can't get caught up on one call or one bad pitch or one single moment. You have to put in a bunch of reps over a long period of time and then look back. If you throw your best pitch on every pitch, if you make your best pitch on every pitch, and you look back at the end of your quarter or your season, you're probably going to be more successful than if you get really caught up in the weeds on every single individual pitch. Obviously, you want to execute. Obviously, you don't want to hang a curveball. Obviously, you don't want to like screw up in a big meeting, right? But it happens. That's the reality. More often than not, you're not going to do that. And so sales kind of taught me, or I should say pitching taught me how to deal with the adversity in sales.
I have blown more conversations. I mean, this goes back to Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, is quick to admit it. I mean, he says, "Oh, look at the games you won with your last second shot." He says, "Yeah, look at the games I lost because I missed shots." We all miss shots. We all have bad conversations, but that's okay. That's fine. Next, move on. It doesn't faze me, because nobody sits there and bats 1,000.
So you start by identifying who is your ideal customer. Who is your ideal customer? Is it a software company I should be calling? Is it a bank? Do they have 5,000 employees? Do they have 500 employees? Are they geographically located near me? Are they in a different country? So you got to identify what companies you are targeting, because if you're not very certain in who you're targeting, then you will be uncertain when you're making the calls. So be very clear on the company you're calling upon. Companies are just large groups of people. So what people within that company stand to benefit from your product, service, good, solution? Identify who is your ideal buyer persona. Is it the HR department? Is it the procurement department? Is it the IT department? You must understand what is their day-to-day. Are they a salesperson? Do they have a quota like me? Do they care about pipeline and revenue? Are they an HR person? Do they care about attracting, retaining, engaging their employees? What do they care about? And until you have those two pieces of information, once you have that, then you're ready to start making calls. Because once you're ready to make calls, you're certain on the account you're going after, you're certain on the buyer you're going after. And then once you call that specific buyer, maybe that you're going top down, you're reaching out to executives, VPC level, or you're going bottoms up, manager, directors. It's slightly different talk tracks for each because they care about different things. So these are all considerations you must keep in mind.
The key is when you're an SDR to sit down knowing what to do rather than having to come up with what to do that day. That's what's going to slow you down. But when you do what I call coiling the spring, and this was something I did, like I would show up early and stay late, even work through the weekend for like the first week of the quarter and make all my lists for all of the personas I could possibly be contacting in my territory. It could be make a list of CFOs in your territory, directors of finance in your territory, chief human resource officers in your territory. Literally every persona, make those lists in advance of all of your key personas. And then you're going to create value statements that are slightly targeted for each of those lists. So they're all going to follow the same framework and be like 80-90% the same, except you're going to replace keywords that make it more targeted for a specific persona. So then when I sat down Monday morning, it didn't matter if I went out that weekend or something and I felt awful and like, I physically had something to do. I had the list ready to go. I had my scripts or my templates, whether I was emailing or calling, there for me. And like, that was something to just get your day started. An analogy I always talk about is Steve Jobs. He used to wear that same black turtleneck and everything like every single day. Obviously an extreme example, but he didn't want to waste mental energy on that stuff. He just wanted to get his day started. I think you want to be doing that in the SDR role too. And it's through a process I call coiling the spring, which I've made like entire videos.
Friday afternoons is the best time to call. Friday afternoons. Okay, I know there's some people like, you got to be kidding me. Here's why I like Friday afternoons, because Friday afternoons, people are starting to wind down. Friday afternoons, there's generally fewer meetings. Friday afternoons, people are a little more relaxed. I get more people to pick up the phone on Friday afternoon than any other time of the week, period. Wow. Especially calling senior level people. I love calling senior level people on Friday afternoons. I have some unbelievable conversations.
You have a data point. I booked like 35% of my pipeline as an SDR via Friday cold calls.
Okay.
Which is crazy.
Wow,
if you think about, like Friday's only 20% of your work week. It's a day where a lot of people aren't working, and 35% of my pipeline is generated on that day.
Timing matters.
I don't know if there's any actual fact behind anything I'm about to say, but these are like my hunches as to why Friday cold calls work. First, I think people tend to have lighter meeting days on Friday. I feel like companies typically try not to schedule a ton of internal stuff. A lot of times sellers don't like to book meetings on Fridays. Like people just typically have a little bit more time in their day where they could pick up the phone. The second thing, I feel like people tend to be in better moods on Friday. You're almost there. It's almost the weekend, almost time to shut the laptop and go really enjoy life for a couple of days. And so I think that allowed me to have some like friendlier, more energetic conversations with people on Fridays. And then the third thing is, and this is kind of contradictory, I think people want to get off the phone because it's a Friday.
Yeah.
But they're less like, I got to get off the phone because I got to get back to this meeting right now. It's more like, let's wrap this up and like, let's table this for next week.
Yes.
I feel like people are kind of predisposed to like, I'm trying to wrap up my week, but let's push this to next week. And I think that provides you an opportunity to book a meeting for the next week.
Yes.
There's other reasons I like Friday cold calls. I think there's like some fun opening lines you can use on Fridays and that kind of stuff. But I have a hunch that that's why I had so much success doing it.
Okay, what's a fun opening line?
Like, and we'll talk about this in depth with cold calls. I think authenticity is so important in cold calls. Like use your voice, use your tone. I like to joke around. I like to have fun. I like to lean into humor.
Yeah.
So I'd be like, hey man, like I know you woke up today being like, it's Friday, the weekend's almost here. I cannot wait to get a cold call today. But like, can I briefly tell you why I'm ruining the weekend?
Oh my
like,
gosh, I like
but that might not work for some people. Like
you have to be able to own it.
Yeah.
But I think it's pretty funny.
Yeah, and like there's other lines like that. But and the other thing I think Tom Malemo always says champions distance themselves on Fridays. A lot of people hang it up early on Fridays. Sometimes I do too. Sometimes I just won't work on a Friday. Like, part of life is knowing when to push the gas pedal, when to let off. But I think it's an opportunity to differentiate yourself from the team that might be wrapping it up at 1 p.m. and you're cold calling till 5. Like, if you want to stand out, especially early in your career, there's value to that.
Most B2B sales reps, if you spend an hour a day, like pounding the phone, I'm not talking about doing research, digging through your list, taking coffee breaks. I'm talking about if you spend an hour a day of actual calling, you're generally going to set 2 to 4 appointments with qualified prospects. And that is all that most B2B sales reps need to be incredibly successful. And my goal was always to set 2 a day. So when I would start my day, I'd start my day with a call block, and I generally could set 2 appointments within my first 30 dials. And I want you to think I'm calling people who are qualified because I know they're qualified because of the other work that I did to make sure that they were qualified in the buying window. So yeah, usually $30. And that's my experience with most B2B reps. Is most B2B reps I work with, I had a group this past week, they were doing two appointments in 20 dials. So my team, with my own sales team, they're probably in the 40 dial range, but we're calling a lot of people who don't really know what we're about, like with digital learning. So they're not really prepared for that conversation. So there's a little bit more pushback there. It takes a little bit more time, but I typically somewhere between 30 and 50 dials. I'd set 2 appointments and I can knock that out in an hour. I mean, that's easy. What I was doing with that list is I was calling to qualify buying windows. So in a lot of cases, I had a name of a business, I had a name of a person. I might have known a few different types of information, but I was essentially calling in and qualifying the person that I needed to talk to, who was the key contact there, the competitor that was in the account. So what were they using? How many people were using it? The how many, how much, and then I would really try to qualify a contract. So when was their buying window going to open? So if they didn't have a contract, like what would be a catalyst that would cause them a compelling event, as we would call it then, to cause them to want to buy? In a lot of cases, they would have a contract with a competitor. So I'm just identifying the contract X date, because if I know the X date, I know they got to make a decision. So in between meetings, I could peel off 5 calls. And in those calls, I'm just asking basic questions like, who's the competitor? Who are you getting your services from now? And then I would take that information and make my CRM better. And as my CRM got better, my list got better, so that when I came in the morning, and in the book, I talk about the prospecting pyramid, and it's something you want to read in the book. But in the morning when I came in, my first calls were all focused on setting appointments with opportunities that I knew were qualified to do business with me. And so, and by the way, the closer people are to a buying window, the more likely they're going to say yes to a meeting, and the less likely they're going to give you an objection. So when we start thinking about prospecting in the database, for most reps, what we have to realize is that if you call somebody or you write somebody and you meet them at a conference, or you go knock on their door and you get information, any information that is more information than you had the day before, that was a victory. Count it that way. High five yourself. And for God's sake, put it in the CRM, because you're not going to remember it if you don't put it in the CRM. If you go into modern CRMs have stages, and deals they stall, they get fallback, but usually they're either close won or close lost. And there's this massive list of deals that are closed lost that nobody ever talks to again.
Yes.
Like, we close lost it and we just move it off the board, and you don't know what changed in their life. It is the greatest prospecting list because they already know who you are. And oh, by the way, you already know they're qualified. They just didn't buy from you. We did this year. We went back on our closed loss for 4 years and pulled those lists and dialed them up and sold business.
Let's go.
Because they had said, you know what, at the time we had chosen to do business with your competitor, it did not work out very well. But they're not going to call you. They're not going to wake up and go, you know what, we didn't do business with them, we failed, so we're going to call them up and tell them that we're a bunch of schmucks and made bad decisions. They're not doing that. So what you did, Chris, that's like the 1%er move. Like, nobody does that. Yeah, the key to messaging is empathy, right? The key to messaging is, and all empathy is, the ability to see things through someone else's eyes. So when you're thinking about prospecting messaging, when it's synchronous messaging, so it's a telephone call, and a telephone call is what you say, right? right? So you're going to say, we use because statements. So I ask for something and then I give someone a reason. I want to meet with you because, right? It's really simple and it's short and it doesn't have to be perfect. Again, you're tucking horseshoes and hand grenades, right? It just has to be good enough to get you the outcome that you're looking for. And because if it doesn't work, you can make another phone call and try it again. You have the ability to iterate your messaging really quickly. With a voicemail message, you really need the message to be compelling, right? So if it, like a voice message, when we say voicemail, we're talking about voice messages. LinkedIn, by the way, the voice messaging option in LinkedIn direct messaging is really powerful. The same thing in WhatsApp, the same thing in Messenger, but the LinkedIn Messenger or voice messages, I think is powerful because it really does spark your curiosity. If someone leaves you a voice message, you're going to click on it to listen to it. So in those messages, you want it to be compelling enough, and compelling means like you cause them to want to respond to you. You don't want to start a message with, "Hey, I'm amazing. My company is awesome, and we're awesome." You want to start a message with, "Hey, if I were in your shoes, I might feel this way." Or a lot of people that are just like you are having these problems, and I totally get how frustrating that can be to you. Like you really want to, again, that's why I say empathy. I want to be able to lead messaging from their point of view, not my point of view. So typically, for example, if I'm calling prospects all in the same industry or all in the same role, all would have the same problems, I'll create one set of messaging that I'll use against all those prospects. Because if you're an SDR or if you're an account executive, and these days there are a lot more account executives who are doing full desk roles, right? They're doing their own prospecting and
that's
they're
me, by the way.
And they're
totally
selling, right?
Yeah.
And SDRs simply because VC money is kind of dried up or having to go away because they're super expensive, and it just doesn't make sense for a lot of businesses to pay two people to do one person's role. So we're in different places, but if you think about it, right, and I'm building these type of messaging, when I'm making a lot of prospecting calls to a lot of companies, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, people in middle management, so managers and directors, it just doesn't make sense for me to come up with a brand new message for every single person I'm calling. But if you're calling the CMO about a $10 million cloud deal, your message needs to be unique to that person.
Yes.
That would be personalized. That takes time. You had to go do the research, right? You had to go look and see, what are they doing? Hey, I read this. I've got this information about you. That is harder. And as you move up market, either through you're moving into a higher level role, a C-level role, or you're selling bigger deals, the more you're going to need to use a personalized approach versus a targeted approach. And it's not that either one is better or worse. It's just in one situation, it's not efficient to come up with a new message for every single person. And the other is it would be stupid if you came to them with a generic message, because you're going to get one shot at this and your one shot better be good.
There's a huge difference between having a script and sounding scripted. And when I say a script, I don't mean bullet points or guidelines and all that other BS that people love to throw out there. I'm literally saying word for word, this is what it sounds like. Now, you practice it, you know it. Over time, every time you do it, it'll become more authentic. And so what was on the page the first time, by the time you really get it down, you'll probably do about 80 or 90% of it anyway. So that is the key piece of a script. And I guarantee you, every person who wants to come and say they hate scripts, they don't like scripts, I guarantee you have many scripts where you say the same thing over and over again in this one little part. When they ask about the product and how does it work, got an answer. When they ask about the competition, boom, got an answer. Like, those are scripts, right? Just don't confuse that scripts are bad, and make sure you understand there's a difference between having a script and sounding scripted. I don't want anybody to sound scripted. And the first time you do it, you're going to sound scripted, because it's the first time you do it.
Yeah, the biggest variable you have on a cold call is how you sound. That's by far the most important.
Let's dig
part.
into that. Let's dig into that. And the script is interesting, but what people don't realize what you're saying, the truth is it matters how you deliver it. Go ahead.
Totally right. So for example, I like to start cold calls with, how are you? I say, hey, how's it going? Hey, this is Kyle calling from Vouris. How's it going? Some people are very passionate that how are you is not the right way to start a cold call. I've been doing it for years. So I don't know if that matters all that much. I don't know how much a permission-based opener is effective versus not using a permission-based opener. So for those of you who don't know, the one that I like is, do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions and let you decide if we should chat? I don't know. I did a test. It worked a lot better for my team. So that's why I started using it. It's worked well for people. But then I meet people who did a test on their own. They felt that it didn't work well. I've also had some reps that do really well with a certain script and other reps not do well with the script. So the more that I've been in this role and have had a lot of exposure to SDRs and cold calls, the more I believe the person using a script that they're comfortable with, that aligns with how they communicate and they are confident in, the better they'll do. So I care a lot less about the script and a lot more about how comfortable somebody is on a cold call. And I found much more success with helping people become more comfortable on a cold call than I have with giving them a special script.
I actually learned this from Aaron Ross, who was, sort of the, one of the godfather of the SDR role back literally about 12 years ago when he wrote Predictable Revenue.
Oh, I read that book. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Predictable Revenue.
And there's lots of tones which we can go over, but the most interesting thing that I learned from him was that one of the best tones of voice is act like you're asking for directions or giving directions. So when I was saying, hey, Chris, would you be open to hearing what my customers have? I'm like, Chris, I don't know you, but how do I get from West 37th to East 45th? Like, I'm asking for some direction, right? Even though I'm leading the conversation. And then you can flip it. Oh, you would like to hear, okay, well, based on what you shared, Chris, we had this similar customer who had the problem, and this is how they were, this is what they said about us versus them. Does that feel like that resonates the right way with you? So now I'm asking for directions, I'm giving some directions, and then I'm asking for directions again. And so I just thought that was a really great, simple way to remember it.
Like, if you think about booking a meeting, at some point you're going to have to get to the point where you can pitch. Most people don't even give themselves that opportunity because they blow it in the opening.
Yeah.
That is also, we talked about this earlier, got to control the things you can control. I cannot control how someone's going to respond. I can control how I open a cold call, and I can control the authenticity and the confidence and the conviction in which I do it. I want the prospect to feel like they're in control of the conversation and like I'm not hijacking their time. So I want to give them the opportunity to give me permission earlier in the call. So for me, it's, hey, this is JC calling with the Gong. Could I super briefly explain why I'm calling you? I want to get it right off the bat. Like, can I have permission to just tell you why I'm calling you?
You got right to it.
Right to it.
And I'm in control now. I'm like, okay, sure. Like maybe I'm busy and but you know what? You're being a human being. You're not just jumping into a pitch.
Yeah. Or like, hey, I know it's super annoying to get a cold call. Could I have 10 seconds to specifically explain why I'm calling you?
I like that specifically too. It alludes to the fact that I am not reaching out by accident. I'm in business. So
I think we talked about this earlier. Like, I'm very analytical. Like, how is someone going to feel? And I like to zoom out a lot. And I think about I get cold calls from Sirius XM, where I'm clearly on a list of 10,000 people where I'm getting read the same exact pitch. And it's so off-putting. And I'm just please hang up. Please take me off your call list. So my thought is how can I, as early as possible in the call, prove that I'm not that?
Yeah.
I'm not calling about your extended car warranty. I know who you are and I'm calling you for a reason. So I want to early on be can I quickly explain why I'm specifically calling you?
Yes.
How you sound is far more important than what you say. And there's no shortage of cold call openers, but I'll just demonstrate it for you.
Okay.
So I'm going to say the same thing in two different ways.
Okay.
Hey, Chris, my name is Josh. We've never spoken before, but I was hoping you could help me out for a minute. You got a second?
Sorry, I'm busy.
Now I'm going to say the same thing. Hey, Chris, my name is Josh. We've never spoken before. I was hoping you could help me out for a moment.
Yeah.
So same exact thing.
Yeah.
But the tonality is a little different because the intent is different. Hey, Chris, you are probably going to hate me because this is a cold call. Would you like to hang up or roll the dice? You feeling lucky today? A little more playful.
That was a really good one. I mean, they were all good.
But it's not good. It has to feel good for you.
Yeah.
It has to feel good for you. I prefer, a great cold call that I got last week or 2 weeks ago from a real estate agent. Hey, Josh, my name is Matt. I'm a local agent in Boca. Calling about the home on Marbella Drive. Do you still own it? Yeah, I do. Josh, you're probably aware that the homes in your neighborhood are in high demand. I don't suppose you're looking to sell it anytime soon? And I said, I'm not, which I'm sure he hears all the time. I really like it here. And then he said this. Listen how brilliant this line was. Sounds like that's your forever home. And my desire to correct kicked in. I'm like, well, I wouldn't say forever home. He goes, no, I would love to live in the mountains, but I went into this whole shenanigans about why I can't move right now. And then he said, look, I get it. From time to time, I send out comps, what the homes are worth in your neighborhood. If you'd like, I could put shit to the list so you can see what's available. I said, sure. Now I'm on his list. And every once in a while, I get email from him. And when I am ready to sell, I will think of him. But that's another opener, not permission-based. But hey, Josh, my name is Matt. I'm calling about the Inside Selling podcast. Do you still produce that? That's another kind of an opener. Here's another kind of an opener. Hey, Chris, my name is Josh. We've never spoken before. First time I caught you. I was hoping to speak with you for a moment. Do you got a second? All right. So again, pick the one that feels good for you. There's no magic one. The intent and the tonality matters more than the opener. And this is just based on cold calling for 20 years and working with a lot of people. You can have the same rep using the same opener, completely different vibes because of intent. One intent is, I got to get through the opener. I got to get the sale. The other intent is, I'm indifferent.
It's one of those things where someone had to get on the phone first and someone had to fail, and everyone was going to fail. And I just was like, I was able to compartmentalize and just be like, all right, just go handle it. Like, go do what you got to do. But for me, I think this is kind of where the humor thing started coming in for me. It was like, how do I be really self-aware to these people that, like, I know I'm ruining their day is a strong word, but how do I know that, like, how do I let them know I know they don't want to talk to me? And so I would make self-deprecating jokes. It's, I would call out the fact that I was a salesperson. I would say, I know you'd probably rather be at jury duty right now or like getting a root canal than talking to me, but like, I know that. And like, here's why I'm calling. Like, I didn't just call you for no reason. Didn't always work, but it worked enough that like, it was kind of my strategy. And so, I think once you realize that you're not ruining anybody's day and like their life is going to go on, and sometimes they're mad, but it's their own shit they're dealing with, like you kind of just push through it.
I think with cold calling, the most important thing, again, is to understand the objective is authentic conversation. Okay. So the first thing that we need to do is, in order to have authentic conversation, we need to know like what bad looks like and sounds like. So if we reverse engineer and think about from the prospect's point of view, when they pick up the phone, what are the bad experiences that they have? So I really believe that, and you let me know if you feel differently, no one picks up a cold call on purpose. They don't pick up the call thinking it's a salesperson and they're like eager to hear your pitch. They thought that you were someone else, maybe a client, maybe their kid's school. Would you agree? Yeah.
100% agree. And sometimes I feel like now some of these spammers, they're actual people, they're using my home area code 239 from Naples, Florida. And sometimes it tricks me or like, totally. I'd never intentionally pick it up. I'm honest, even me, I'm not an executive, but I'm busy executing on my priorities. So
yeah. So people don't pick up the cold call on purpose. So a philosophy, if we break down the call into intro, hook, and close, where our goal in the intro, about 80% of the time, the cold call fails in the first 60 seconds. So our goal in that first 60 seconds is just to buy more time. If we can do that, we're doing better than 80-90% of reps. That hook area, that's where we're going to want to engage the prospect with a few questions, and we want to like really find a reason to meet. And then the close, that's where we want to secure time and ask for the meeting and that kind of stuff. So for your intro, I'm a big fan of a permission-based intro. You don't have to use one though.
I am too, by the way. I definitely am.
I think it's a way to do it. The psychology here is that if I'm cold calling Chris, by definition, he did not ask me to call him. So I'm going to get him to opt in. And there's a bunch of different variations of this. I'll rattle off a few, but I think one of the worst ways to open your call is, hey, Chris, it's Jason with OutboundSquad. I was calling about sales training at XYZ company. You got a minute? And it's like, I'm talking about the solution and the, like, right at the top, I'm like already like preparing this prospect for a pitch. We don't want to do that. Okay. So if you're asking, I wanted to inquire if sales training is top of your mind, I want to see if you're interested in our sales training. Don't do any of that kind of stuff. Okay. So I'll give you kind of the basic formula. It's
Yeah.
some sort of acknowledgement or empathy, and then a specific request for time. So I'll give you a couple different variations
Yeah.
that I've used and I've heard reps use. So one's the classic, I call it. It's, hey, Chris, it's Jason with OutboundSquad. I know I probably got you in the middle of something. Do you got a minute for me to share the reason for my call? The one that when I was working with Gong, that they sort of popularized that I really liked, and I listened to them do tons of calls with sales executives. Your tonality is super important with this. Hey, Chris, it's Jason with OutboundSquad. I don't suppose I caught you at the worst possible time, did I? And you got to kind of chuckle, smile, like your tonality and pace is so important.
I loved your tone because I nerd out on these things and it was just so well delivered. You know,
Oh,
it sounded very authentic, and yeah, the tone is everything.
Tone it's like 80% of the game. It is in the opener. I think people stress out about the best opener. Really, it's like, dude, do you sound confident and like you've done this a million times or not? That's really big. So the advice that I would give on tonality is to be friendly, and you want to be incredibly hard to be an asshole too, is my advice. Okay.
Yeah.
Put a big old smile on your face, make it really hard to be rude to you. And then no up talk or customer service voice. So you're not talking to your insurance agent. You're not doing things like, hey, Chris, it's Jason with OutboundSquad. How's your day going? I don't know why, but when in customer service roles and sales, we tend to put on this fake voice that we don't normally use.
Did I catch you at a bad time? Like,
Did I catch you at a bad time? Yeah, it's really weird. The other one, the third one that I would share with you, and this is a favorite of mine and of a lot of the reps that I work with too, is you're going to pack the front of your line, your opening line, with something relevant to the prospect. So I'm working with a client right now that sells a software that helps these large, like, solar companies, like, invest in new properties and projects. So one of the things that they run into is they have a new project coming up, and it just takes a really long time for them to work with consultants and all this other stuff to just do what's called due diligence on the land. So when they call, they'll say, hey, Chris, was just giving you a call about the solar project you guys just launched in Austin. Oh, by the way, it's Jason with OutboundSquad. You got a minute? So you're opening up with something that's like going to perk the prospect's ear. So there's this book called Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yes.
And the concept, so you've read it, there's system 1 and system 2 thinking. So our brain essentially operates in these two modes. System 1 is this very, it's instinctive. It's when I'm driving a car and someone swerves out in the middle of the road, I don't even think about how to respond. I just automatically swerve out of the way. The equivalent in sales is when you walk into a mall and I see a salesperson approaching me out of the corner of my eye, and I don't know about you, I look away. Usually I try not to make eye contact. It
I see
doesn't
those
even
people
matter.
in Austin on the street.
Yeah.
Like, not even a salesperson, but they're talking about a certain cause, which maybe is a good cause, but
Yeah.
let's be real. It's just, you
don't even think twice about it, right? It's instinctive. System 2 is calculated. That's the mode that you and I are in right now. We're thinking about what we're saying. We're very intentional. We want to break the prospect out of system 1. So when they're giving you objections like not interested, not right now, send me an email. Who is this? Who are you calling from? In the first 15, 20 seconds, that's just a habitual response. That's an instinctive response. So by doing some of these things and getting their attention, we're breaking them out of system 1 and getting them into system 2, where they were just on their phone, they're writing email, whatever that they were doing. We want to get them there thinking. So I'll go ahead and pause there. That's a part of the intro. The first part is that permission-based opener.
You start off by not saying, hi, I'm Mark Hunter. I'd like to sell you something. Click. That's not. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by asking you a question. I'm going to say, hey, Chris, other companies in your space have been dealing with this issue. Curious as to how you're handling it. And Chris, you're probably going to stop me. Who are you? You're right. Hey, I'm Mark Hunter, the sales center. I get to work with companies just similar to yours, helping them solve that problem. You see, what's interesting is the customer asks the other person to ask you who you are. Now they're listening, because when you first pick up, when they first be, hi, I'm Mark Hunter of the Sales Center. They don't hear that. They don't hear the first 5 words. So I just wasted. So what I do is I just ask them a question. I love asking them a question to engage them, because they're going to say, well, why are you calling? Why are you asking? And that's when I say, well, I've been working with other companies in your industry to help them deal with that same issue. I'm Mark Hunter at the Sales Center.
Wow, this is different than anything I've heard.
Who wakes up in the morning and says, I hope 5 salespeople call me today? Said nobody. So if I can maybe get that window where you see me as somebody different, ooh, that's interesting.
But the single talk track that I recommend, that I've used for 60,000 outbound cold calls, and this works for any product, any industry, because I've personally used it to sell software, over $1 million in recurring revenue, and now over $50,000 in pharmaceutical containers and medical supplies. So it works, I would say, and we'll do a brief role play.
Okay.
Hey, Chris, this is Trent from D&D Wholesale. How are you?
Doing all right. Tell me, why are you calling?
It's great to hear, Chris. The reason I'm calling you specifically is I noticed that you oversee human resources at Audio Technica. Is attracting, retaining, and engaging your employees, is that a priority for your team this year?
I mean, well, obviously that's my role.
I figured it was. We specialize in helping groups just like yours to better collect feedback from their employees so that they can make better decisions to drive those outcomes. Being that this is a priority to you today, let's set up an introductory meeting so that I can talk about your top priorities and introduce how we might be able to help. So I've found to be very straightforward, very transparent. Hey, Chris, this is Trent from my company name. How are you? Good. No matter what they say at that point, they may say, I'm doing well. How are you? If they do that, you know you're in. If they don't, you know you got to get into it immediately. So that beginning is going to tell you a lot about their current state. So then I immediately get into the reason I'm calling you specifically is, and you always got to give them the reason you're calling, because they want to know who you are, what you want, why you're calling them. The reason I'm calling you, and this is where you can play with it a little bit. If you're low level, you're going to say, I'm following up on a recent email. Does Audio Technica ring a bell? You probably don't want to, if you're calling low level people, maybe that will work. But the way I start is I lead with a value-based opener. I know Chris oversees human resources, and I know that they have to care about attracting, retaining, and engaging their employees. Those are business outcomes of my solution. They're not features. So think about what outcomes you're selling. Lead with that. Get them to say yes. Validate what you're trying to share with them is relevant to them, which we've done. Then you can get into your opener, hey, or your value prop. We work with companies just like you all day to help them achieve this. Quick, go into the call to action. And that's what you do.
I teach keeping the cold call opening. Personally, I like to keep it simple, and its purpose is to get you to what I call step 2, which is going into a value statement where you tell them who you are, why you're calling, and what you want. But a downward inflecting cold call opening can sound something like, hey, Chris, this is Connor Murray calling from X company. How are you? And I call it an assumptive formality. Like what I'm seeking from them is a quick phrase or formality back. And then once they give that to me, then I'm going to say, good, yeah, I'm just reaching out because, and then I'm going to go right into why I'm calling. Where an upward inflecting tone could be like, hey, Chris, this is Connor Murray calling from X company. How are you? And it's sort of signaling like to the prospect.
What do you want?
Yeah, they're like, what?
It's like, are you sure of yourself? Who's this guy? He seems like he's like hiding something.
Yeah, or I'm busy. Like, is this going to take a while? Like the downward inflection sounds like I'm not here to waste your time. Just give me a quick formality back, and then I'm going to go right into why I'm calling. So I preach, I like the downward inflecting tone.
And the opener's simple. It sounds like you just, hey, Connor, this is Chris calling from Oracle. How are you?
If I can just keep it within my funnel and give what I call an assumptive formality so that I receive a formality back, I'm not even going to give them the chance to ask questions. I'm going to go right into what I call my value statement, where I take control of the call and try and signal confidence and be concise and tell them, here's exactly who I am, why I'm calling, and what I want. Because I think those are the 3 questions prospects are subconsciously wondering in their head when they answer a phone and they realize, I don't know this person and I don't have their number. They're wondering, who are you? Why are you calling me? And what do you want from me? So I use the opening as a means of getting into that. I don't like to overcomplicate the opening. I know some people like to have fun with their cold call openings, and That's cool. That just wasn't me. I have fun booking the meetings. I don't need to spice up my cold call openers personally. And I've just found that it worked for me, and I've seen it resonate with a lot of people, which is why I teach it.
Hey, it's Will Aitken. I don't even have a company name anymore, so it makes this part a lot shorter. It's Will Aitken. Look, I know I'm calling out the blue. However, do you have a couple of moments to chat? A couple of moments, not minutes, because then I'm not setting the wrong expectation if we end up talking for 10 minutes. That's it. And then a very similar, hey, saw this, maybe you think this, question, go into it.
Here's how you do it. You know, I pick up the phone, someone answers the phone, my first response is, yeah, oh, wow, someone picked up the phone.
Yeah, I love that. I haven't heard that one.
Like, yeah, it's like,
I
oh, wow,
love that.
picked up the phone. Like Chris, you just made my day. By the way, if you don't like what I have to say, you know, you can just hang up on me. Is that fair?
Yeah,
now,
that's fair.
Chris,
Wow.
You know, now they might hang up on you, but
that was so good.
I'm so off guard by, oh, wow, someone picked up the phone. That's one. You can also just say, yep, this is a cold call, and I got the most exciting thing to tell you. Here's what it is, and hang up if you don't like it. Like, you know, like you can just sort of try to throw them off their base a little bit. So those are two of my favorites. I mean, I teach 4 or 5 different scripts, but you got to find the one that's authentic to you. If humor's not your thing, then don't do it, right?
Imagine someone like you're feeling really nervous. You're not going to be like, oh, you actually picked up. like But I actually, one thing I used when I was more nervous on making cold calls is, hey, Richard, this is Chris. I'm calling from Bespin Global. I honestly hate making cold calls, but I thought it'd be really important to talk to you. Do you have 15 seconds for me to tell you why I'm calling?
One. Yeah.
And it just, I was admitting that I did hate making cold calls. They're like, okay, this is a human being, sure. And like, I feel a little bad for him.
Another one that I like is called the research call. It's like, hey, Chris, reaching out to people like you and trying to do some research on how, you know, people in your role solve this problem. Oh, by the way, I'm not going to try and sell you on this phone call. And so now I'm just doing research and I'm asking questions and I'm learning and I'm building a rapport and a trust. And then, thanks, Chris, I really appreciate it. You know, maybe a week later, I'll call back and see. Hey, Chris, you know, I was thinking about our conversation. You know, thank you so much for that advice. It was really good. By the way, we do have this solution. Would you be open to even hearing about it?
Yeah, I'm open.
So
sure.
Now, the flip side of that is, you know, if they say yes to the research call and you say, I'm not going to sell you, at some point it might turn into, they might be, well, what are you trying to do? What do you do? It's like, well, hold on, Chris, I'm going to answer your question for context, but I promise you I'm not going to sell you, but here's what we do. Now, all of a sudden you've got permission to pitch them to a certain degree.
Hey, Chris, it's Will Aitken from company. I'm in the middle of some research. I was hoping you might be able to help me out. So that's it. As you can tell, I haven't done that one recently.
First of all, what I do like is, can you help me out? Like someone asking for directions. It's like, yeah, I want to help you.
Also, research, it just feels soft. And I'm not, as long as I follow up in the right way with a good question that is like, oh, I'm looking to learn, it's not deceptive. So it is a cold call, but I'm coming from the point of like, hey, I'm just trying to figure out where I am here. I'm trying to get a sense of the land. Like you said, people like to help lost people a little bit.
Yes.
So like if someone says, hey, do you mind help me out? You almost instinctually go, yes. When I go, hey, can I help you find anything in a store? You instantly go, no. So almost flipping on its head, instead of offering to help them, you ask them to help you. Anyway, so then they go, yeah, sure. Sorry, how can I help you? I'm like, and then I go into my opener, which is almost the same after my permission-based opener, because that's technically a permission-based opener. Can you help me out as a yes, no, but just a little bit different spin on it. And then I go, yeah, look, so I happen to notice this thing about you. So it could be one of those growth triggers, those symptoms, those critical events that I've observed. A lot of folks are finding this problem over here. So I want to figure out who's in charge of this function or this area or that process at company. And then they go, that's a me. And I'm like, sweet, this is going to be helpful to you then. And then bang, we go into the call. Or they go, oh, no, that's not me. And do you mind? Done it. Okay. Do you mind if I ask who would be the right person to talk to about this? It's typically this title. Who would it be at your company? And they might go, oh, actually, that's my title. It is my thing. Or they'll go, oh, that's actually Josh over in accounting. I'm like, oh, could I ask you one last favor then? Do you mind if I give Josh a call and say that you and I just had this quick conversation? And then half of them say yes, half of them go, no, I don't feel comfortable doing that. But then I can call Josh immediately after and go, hey, I just spoke with Chris and he told me you're the person to talk to about this. And that's a really warm call at that point, because it's almost like a referral, but not really, because all you did was get a name.
So Jason, you use a great permission-based opener with me, but I'm still like, hey, sorry, I'm running to a meeting. I gotta go. How would you handle that objection? So you haven't even gotten to framing the value yet.
Yeah. So if someone says I have a meeting and I gotta go, the framework behind objection handling, and again, our objective with objections is we don't want to handle the objection right away. We just want the prospect to be able to listen to us and have genuine, authentic dialogue with them. So I actually want to greet the objection. I want to do the opposite. I'm just going to greet or acknowledge the objection they just gave me, and then I'm going to go and offer an alternative, essentially. So if someone says, I'm about to hop into a meeting, you could say, oh, hey, totally fine. Or, hey, got it. Or, sounds like I caught you in the middle. Any acknowledgement of that is, there's no perfect answer to that. And if it's I'm about to hop into a meeting, it's, well, hey, they didn't say they didn't want to talk right now. Let's just say, oh, hey, no problem, Chris. I'll make this quick. I was giving you a call because I speak with a lot of HR leaders. And one thing they keep telling me right now is they're using 3, 4, 5 different systems for payroll, benefits, et cetera. And it just creates a lot of admin work for their team. And they're looking to get some of that admin work off their team's plate. Is that by chance something that you're thinking about and focused on right now? Or am I totally barking up the wrong tree?
Realistically, a brush off is like, I'm not interested. I'm going to a meeting. I'm busy. Call me back. Send me an email. I'll call you back. Where'd you get my number? Maybe,
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Some of these things, they're like, they're what I would call like a reflex reaction to you. They're kind of almost on autopilot, because no one ever wants to be sold to by the salesperson. No one ever, when they're in the store, almost everyone goes, oh no, just looking, when someone walks up to them and says, hey, can I help you today, sir? And that's the reflex, right? So when that happens, that tells me, if I hear those things, that something I've said just hasn't done enough to differentiate me against all the other things, all the other sales calls, all the other pitches, all the other reps who are reaching out to them. It makes me, I've sounded too much like that if they've reflexed to it. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So that's where, in those cases, what I'm going to try and do is try again, basically. But I don't want to just power right through what they've said. So they say, I'm not interested, or they say, I'm in a meeting, and I just go straight back into it or ask them a question. That's almost combative. So what I would like to do is loads of people call this something different, but I just acknowledge what they said, agree with them, emphatically agree with them. Like, oh my gosh, yeah, totally understand you're not interested. If you were, you probably would have already called me, or
I like that.
Or if you were, then you probably already be a customer of ours. Or totally understand you're not interested. We've never spoken before. Like, I'm putting I'm doing that. Like, it's on me. I'm taking blame for this. It's okay. And then I'm going to go, when you say you're not interested, is that because I absolutely blew what I just said and it just, I fumbled it? Or is it, or are you finding, and then I'm going to repeat a different problem potentially when I opened with, to give myself a second shot at resonating, right? But because the thing is, if I come up to you in a store and I say, Chris, can I help you with anything? And you go, hey, Chris, is there anything particular you're looking for today in the store? I'm a store clerk right now.
I'm looking for some prosciutto, actually.
No, you're not going to say, you're going to go, no, I'm just looking.
Oh, shit.
I'm just looking.
I got hungry, but no, I'm good.
Sometimes I freaking do that, and I'm actually looking for something, and I'm totally lost, and I spend 20 minutes longer because I'm too embarrassed to go back to the sales clerk and say I am actually looking for something, because I told them I wasn't looking for something. You know what I mean? But if I asked you that question again in a different way, then at that point you might break out of autopilot mode and go, actually, I am looking for some prosciutto.
Well, you know what? I've been walking around for the prosciutto for 20 minutes. And you know what? I put my pride aside. You gave me the permission.
Like are you sure? Like if I went, are you sure? You go, oh, actually, I am looking for some mozzarella cheese right now. Am I in the right aisle? And they go, oh, no, you're in the cheddar section, my friend. You got to go down to the artisan cheese section by the olives, right? Like, the point being, like, sometimes you need to break someone out of that. So I want to always take a second swing at that, but I don't want to do it in a combative way. Because if someone says, yes, I'd like to do this, and I'm like, are you sure? I sound like I'm challenging them. I don't want to challenge them. I want to be on their side. So I basically say, totally with you. Going to a meeting, you're busy. I should have let you know I was going to call you. My bad. And then I'm going to ask that question in a new way, presenting a new problem, and get the conversation going. A lot of times people go, send me an email. I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll send you an email. I'll tell you something totally junk. What are you using for this? And then they go, we're using that. Oh, how long have you been using that for? And then suddenly they've almost forgotten they even told me to send an email. We had a 10-minute conversation and bang, we booked the meeting, right? Because that send me an email was a reflex. It wasn't actually they wanted an email. It wasn't because they wanted to read the email. It was just them just trying to get rid of me. But then once we broke them out of that reflex mode and asked them another question and provoked a question, we ended up having a 10-minute conversation that resulted in a meeting, right? So it's just about doing that in a tactful way that doesn't make people more resistant to you. And you do that by agreeing, self-depreciating, taking ownership, being human. And that often gets the conversation keeping going.
You would review my calls and you'd always get the objection at the beginning. Who are you? How did you get my number? I'm running into a meeting. And then the prospect is trying to rush you off the phone. They're trying to brush you off. So then you say, oh, okay, well, and then you're already at
panic mode.
You're panic mode. We've
all been there, anyone who's made cold calls.
And you have to get through that stage. And I realized if the call is ever rushed, it's not me rushing it, it's the prospect rushing it. And I can't control that, but I can control my tone, my pitch, my pace. So I will never allow the call to be rushed, no matter what they try. If they hit me with one of those objections, I'll say, I know I called you out of the blue. May I have 30 seconds for me to tell you the reason why I called you, Chris?
That's again, the tone. It's comforting, it's chill, it's confident.
You can't go away easy.
That's the inner game, by the way. You have to be very confident to be there.
You have to get your mentality right. Like you're ready to help, but that will overcome any objection at the beginning. Don't go away easy, because they need to believe if they brush you off the phone, you will be calling them back. So they need to deal with this right now. And then once you get it,
point.
Totally. And that's what I would always say. If they would say, can you just call me back? Or, hey, I don't really want it. I'd say, look, can I have 30 seconds for me to tell you the reason why I'm calling you? And most of the time you'll get it.
I mean, I'm pretty busy and we're already, we have a solution in place.
I'm not expecting you to change today, but I imagine at some point in the future, you may want to revamp your program or see deeper outcomes. So what I'd love to do is share what we're seeing as best practices in the market. And maybe you can implement those to your programs today, or when you're in a position to look to change, we might be the right partner for you. Just looking to start a partnership.
Well, I guess you make a decent point. I do want to keep my options open. So
let's do it. Well, is Chris at audiotechnico.com still the best email to reach you?
Yeah, you got it.
Good. So on that call, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down the recent industry trends report that we just released, because I think that will be useful to you right now. I'd love to talk more about how your program's working today, and I'll introduce how we can help. If we both agree there's alignment, we can continue the conversation. If not, we can part ways. How does that sound?
That's fair. It sounds good.
Sounds good. Well, I look forward to speaking with you.
I took the meeting because it does make sense to know about my options.
Totally.
And you talk to customers that I don't in my day-to-day as the prospect get to talk to. So you are a thought leader. You called yourself a thought leader. If you take pride in your job, you actually are learning all the win stories and the insights of what's helped other customers.
That's why I said at the very least, you will learn new things that you could implement in your program today.
Yes.
It's such a good line to frame it like that. And I remember one day in particular, I had about 50, 75 accounts. I'm calling big billion plus revenue financial service accounts at this stage of my career. And I remember just sitting there frustrated. And there was a sales manager sitting next to me. He wasn't mine. And I said, man, all of these guys either have something in place today with a competitor, or they just don't believe in doing what we're trying to sell them. And he's like, that's your biggest opportunity, because if they have something in place, call expecting that they already have something in place. Because if they don't, then you can turn it on them and say, if you're not thinking about this, all your competitors are, you got to learn more about what's happening right now. And that's what we can deliver to you. But most of the time, these accounts you're calling are already doing something, and they're already using your competitor that has more resources, that's ranked better on G2. So you already feel like you're at a deficit. So I realized if they're already doing your thing, whether a homegrown solution or with a competitor, it validates to you that they believe the problem you're trying to help them solve is important, and they're doing something today. They've allocated resources to it. So that's a great thing. So you call assuming they're already doing something, and you lead with that partner paradigm. Hey, I don't expect you to change today, but there will come a point when you're up for renewal. You're currently doing this today. Let's just talk about how it's working and share with you different ideas for how you can think about it. And that's the ultimate way to diffuse it, no matter what objection you get, because you're actually leading, not trying to disrupt anything. You're trying to add to them. And then from that, you can then set up a great conversation to start to understand, well, what is the before scenario? What are the negative consequences of that? What are they missing? Okay, well, how do we differentiate from that other provider? What are their weaknesses? What are our strengths? Vice versa. And then start to position yourself, because it's a long sales cycle. It's a long game. It's not pick up the phone, get deals. This is a many, many months, many, many year long-term thing. And if you're playing the long game with it, then that's the right approach. And that's the meta response to any objection. You acknowledge what they say. I know you don't have any budget. We're not talking money today. Hey, I know you're very happy with that solution today. Hey, I know everything's all good. You're not expecting to change. You acknowledge that to diffuse it, take off the pressure, and then reaffirm your intentions. Look, I want to be your partner. In order for me to do that, we got to talk. And I want to understand your world and share with you best practices, because I'm a thought leader. And what I have to say, you got to care about. And that's how you approach it. You got to lead with value.
I think I posted about this before. I think objection handling, I think that term puts us in a position to fail, because I don't think the goal of an objection should be to handle it.
Dude, it's funny. I had another, tech sales thought leader like yourself come on and said the same thing. So,
what do they say?
No, exactly what you're saying though is like customers don't want to be handled, or they don't want to be overcome. I've actually heard. So I got to be careful with my own phraseology.
My first goal when I get hit with an objection is not to handle it, but to understand it. Like, how could you even handle an objection if you don't understand it? Most of the time, the objection you get hit with is not the real thing. It's like an excuse to get you off the phone, or it's like a default reaction that they have. And you might all of a sudden start launching into this defensive monologue trying to handle an objection that isn't actually real.
Yeah.
So step one, always ask a question in response to an objection.
I'm not interested. I mean, that's so high level. I don't know if you want to go ahead, go on your thought.
Yeah,
path.
I'm not interested. Instead of like, well, we're helping a ton of other CRO. Like,
yeah,
that's what most people's default reaction.
Jump into panic mode. Like, oh shoot, all of a sudden the time's ticking.
Like,
they might kick me off. Like,
on average, our customers are making through. They go, are you still not interested? Like, no. It's like, I'm not interested. Like, hey, no worries. I'm a little surprised. Typically, CROs are like super interested in this. I'm curious. Like, are you not interested because you're super aware of what we do and it genuinely has no overlap, or are you not interested because you're just like not really focused on anything in this realm right now? Because I want to know, like, are you actually not interested? Are you just trying to get me off the phone? Do you even know what you're not interested in? Like, or another one, like, hey, typically when I hear that, it means someone's like hyper familiar with what we do and it's genuinely not of interest. Like, is that the case here? And they might be like, well, no, I don't really know what you do. I'm just like not looking to buy anything right now. That's an entirely different conversation than like, I know exactly what you do. I'm just not interested right now. You don't want to go down one rabbit hole if you don't know it's the right hole. You got to seek to understand. You got to ask good questions.
Seek to understand, ask questions, get to the source of the actual objection. And I notice you're using something that Chris Voss calls an accusation audit.
Yeah.
At least I think you are, right? To label what the objection might be, and then they can validate and give you feedback on it. And so that's such a good framework to, what should we call it? Objection understanding?
Yeah,
What's a better
that's
term?
what I try to call it, yeah.
Okay, objection understanding.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll get the trademark
there you go.
for that one.
So the number one mistake people make at the beginning of the call is they talk about their solution. And even if you sell Zoom, let's say, I worked with Zoom for quite a bit. If you sell Zoom, people know who Zoom is, but dude, they don't really know the product suite of Zoom. Zoom is so much more than just a video communication tool now. They have so much there. Yeah. So when you talk about your solution, you're basically assuming that the prospect knows all the problems that it solves and how it would fit into their world and all this other stuff. And What we're essentially asking a complete stranger to do, Chris, is to come into our world and check out how cool our stuff is. That's a big ask of a stranger. Sales, especially prospecting, is all about getting in their world. You add context to your solution by talking in a universal language that buyer and seller understand, and that's priorities and problems. So I want to open up with what I call a reverse pitch. So when I do the permission-based opener, you got a minute for me to share the reason for my call. Chris says yes. I'm going to talk about what I do, but through the lens of a customer. So I'll give you another example. I work with a customer that sells into contact center leaders. So I might say, Chris, I was giving you a call. I noticed you head up the contact centers at ABC Company. I'm talking to a lot of contact center leaders right now, and their number one priority is reducing cost to serve. So they have way too many people calling into the contact center when really they want them to self-serve through FAQs, et cetera. And the other focus that we're hearing right now is really on the employee experience. So churn is pretty high in the contact center, and how do we increase employee retention and provide better training? Does any of that relate with you at all, or are you working on something totally different? So I'm like really specific with the types of personas that I reach out to: call center leader, HR person, CISO, whatever it is. Dude, there's a pattern in what these people care about. There's totally a pattern between those people. I want to speak to common priorities and goals that they have, and I'm looking for alignment at the top. I don't want to say we have this solution. Are you interested in hearing about it? I want to say, hey, we work with a lot of people like you, and they care about these things. Do you also care about those things? Now we're on the same page. Number one rule in sales is don't pitch until you know what they care about. So I'm not going to talk about my solution until I understand what they care about, but I'm kind of talking about it at the same time. It's called customer voice. So you're using customer voice instead of product voice.
You're shifting from, hey, look how great we are, we do this, to I get your world. I talk to other people like you, and they're facing these challenges. How are you handling that? Or are you dealing with these challenges yourself? And I, as the prospect, as I heard you give a reverse pitch to me, if I was the contact person, I'd be like, man, Jason actually gets my world. I think he might be able to help me. Taking a meeting with him will actually be worth my time.
Yeah, skepticism is your number one enemy that you have to like combat in any kind of selling, but especially cold prospecting. So sales is one of those careers, I think besides maybe lawyers, it's probably one of the few jobs where almost everyone you interact with is skeptical of you, including your customers.
You said you were struggling, and then you simplified and found a formula that worked, and this is what it is. So let's go to the next part.
And that's what I call the value statement, which is just 3 parts, and it's answering those 3 key questions. It's who I am, why I'm calling you, and what I want from you, which is generally time on their calendar. What we're really selling as SDRs is time on their calendar. And this comes as a relief because a lot of people feel like they have to sell the whole value proposition of their company on a cold call, when that's not the case. The reason for your call is to book a meeting with this person. You've identified a target persona or a target contact. You want to set aside time on their calendar to then have a deeper discussion. So the reason I didn't always think of this as a value statement. This more came to be when I became a manager and I had to communicate to other reps how to do this. But what I found as an SDR when I started out is, I would try those permission-based openers, pattern interrupts. It would go on who knows what tangent before I could actually start getting into the purpose of my call. And then generally people are trained oftentimes to just start asking questions. I don't think they give off enough value before they start asking the prospect, so what are you currently using for whatever you're selling? And how's that going for you? What would you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10? Do you have any priorities in the near future? And it almost sounds like an interview or a survey that the prospect has taken. And I just remind people, like, we've typically just interrupted these prospects in the middle of their workday. They were probably like walking to the break room to get coffee, and they answered their phone thinking it could be related to their work, and it's you. And you're just peppering them with a bunch of questions. And that's why you get these defensive tones. So I just felt myself, and I watched as other SDRs as a manager, they start dealing with these defensive tones. They're kind of just getting disrespected, and the prospect's clearly trying to push them off the phone without being too rude. And then it gets to the point where the prospect's like, I don't know what else to do here. I'm just going to hang up. And that's how a lot of calls went. And those were the most demoralizing ones for me as an SDR, because you'd spend 5 minutes on the phone trying to get anything going by asking these questions. And then they'd hang up on you before you even got a chance to tell them why you're calling, which is you want to book a meeting. So I don't remember if this was conscious or subconscious, but I just decided if I'm going to go down on a cold call, I want to go down swinging. So I'm going to take control and I'm going to answer those 3 questions: who I am, why I'm calling, which is typically what priorities and challenges you solve and how you solve them, and then go straight into asking for what you want, which is time on their calendar.
Yeah.
That's what I say you have a non-zero chance of booking the meeting if you ask for time on their calendar. If you don't ask for the time on their calendar, you never had a chance of booking the meeting. And that's why I think those calls are so demoralizing when they hang up before you even got to ask, because then you're like, well, what was the point? I didn't even have a chance. I didn't even ask what the purpose. But if you at least ask, even if your cold call script is terrible, your tone is off, if you at least ask, you give yourself a non-zero chance of booking the meeting, which mathematically increases your chance infinitely by going from a 0 to a non-0%. So especially for new SDRs, I train them to essentially go for the kill early on in the call. And then they don't always bite, obviously, but now at least you've signaled like you're competent. You know exactly, you've signaled a lot with your tone and how concise you were. And there's ways to make we could talk about it, but how to make the value statement targeted for the specific persona you're reaching out to. And now you've signaled a lot about you and your company, and that this next step might not be a waste of their time, because now they might push back, but at least they're signaling they're willing to engage and go back and forth with you. And you've concisely answered those 3 questions. So it's sort of a framework to follow that worked well for me. And I've seen it work well for a lot of people. So an example, like let's say I was calling someone in finance. My opening would just be like, hey, Chris, this is Connor Murray calling from X company. How are you? And then formality back, I'd say, good. I'm just reaching out because I'm part of the team that supports X company regarding back office financial applications. So anything related to your planning, budgeting, and financial reporting processes. And I'm just reaching out because we work with companies specifically in the Y industry, usually on priorities related to strategic planning, rolling forecasts, intercompany planning, and any other related processes. And I know I kind of called you out of the blue here, so I'm more just looking to set aside some time next week to introduce my team and get you aligned with your priorities going forward. Are you free on Wednesday or Thursday next week? So
Thursday's like probably a little better. Just kidding.
Yeah, I just like that's like one example.
That was great, man. Super professional. And this is what cold calling looks like at a top company. It's real crisp, you know. And I love that you're focused on setting aside time. Because one quick thought is like, one time I set a meeting with a CIO of a big enterprise company, and I said, like, there's so much breadth to what Oracle does. You have NetSuite, we acquired them. We don't know what we don't know in terms of how we can work together until we have a conversation.
Sell the time first, because you remember, it's respecting their time. You typically just interrupted these people. Like I get cold calls sometimes from like sales automation companies, and I'm like, I'm on a Zoom right now. Like I just put myself on mute because I thought you were a customer. Yeah. But if they start engage after you deliver that and they start engaging with you, then you can start asking some of those qualifying questions. Sure. But now they've signaled they're willing to talk with you. But the way you can use that framework is in that one, I named priorities like planning, budgeting, financial reporting, because I was reaching out to someone in finance. You could keep almost all that the same, but instead of saying, we support you regarding back office financial applications, if you're reaching out to someone in HR or a different persona, you could say, we support you regarding HR applications. So anything related to, I don't know, talent acquisition, employee engagement, recruiting, and you can keep the structure the same, but just change. And when I give these to people, I put in parentheses the areas where they can sort of like plug and play. And that's how you can move fast at a high quality. Cause that's the name of the game in most SDR jobs. Like unless you have a really like enterprise territory where you only have like 10 strategic accounts, if you're in an SMB or a mid-market territory where you oftentimes have thousands of accounts to reach out to or hundreds of accounts, the goal is to move as fast as possible while maintaining a high quality. And then separately, you can identify some of those like really strategic accounts that you know are good targets, and maybe you go an extra mile for those. But this is my framework for Yeah, it gives you a non-zero chance. It's
I
repeatable.
love that.
It's high quality. You can keep it personalized and targeted at scale. And now you know as an SDR what you're going to do when that prospect says hello. You're going to get an assumptive formality and then deliver that value statement that you've rehearsed literally hundreds of times. Another big recommendation, don't just practice this on live calls. Like spend 5-10 minutes a day practicing this so that it like flows out of your mouth when you actually do it live.
Well put. I had this keynote speaker, Victor Antonio, on the channel recently, and he said it should be like singing a song.
Yeah. So look, my belief is we should be having conversations. So it's not so much about a pitch. It's more about, can I help this person? So what I generally do is I say something along the lines of, typically when I talk to whatever type of role they're in, right? CMOs, founders, whatever it is. Typically when I talk to founders, they tell me that they struggle with one of two things: challenge number one or challenge number two. Curious, which one of those resonates more with you? Why does it resonate? How are you trying to manage that today? What are you trying to do to fix it? Like, then you can ask questions like that. And the whole goal is try to learn more about their problem, the impacts of those problems, how they're trying to solve those problems, and then positioning yourself as a solution to that problem, and then booking a meeting from there. And I've always found that that's been more effective for me than pitching aggressively up front.
I go into every prospecting call with 3 or 4 questions I want to ask you. Rarely do I get through all 3 or 4, rarely, because whatever it is you share with me, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question on it. Hey, really, that's interesting. Tell me more. Do you have an example? Can you share? And now, what are you doing? You are not behaving like a salesperson, because you're actually valuing what the customer's saying. And oh, by the way, you know what? They're going to be far more likely to take the follow-up meeting, because you're actually listening to them.
I do find serving up a little bit for them can help just narrow it down a little bit, right? Because getting someone from you can do this to both establish that you have credibility because you talk to people like them. I like to go is like, oh, typically folks are seeing this and this. Which of those is more relevant to you right now? Or are you absolutely freaking crushing your payroll right now? It's like every week you're paying everyone on time. There's never been a mistake ever. Like that's also a bit more like self-depreciating, because you're giving them like, well, no. And then you go, okay, now tell me more about that. All right. And then it's like, boom, we're into it. Help me out here. Tell me more about that. Walk me through. And then I'm just going to try and get them talking.
Yeah. 100%. I've seen statistics that cold or calls that last longer have higher conversion rates. It's like you do want them to talk a little bit. And again, going back to Josh, I always loved how he said prospects find big, expensive problems interesting. And so it's like I'm talking to a CTO, like we work with other CTOs who are telling us that they're spending 20% more on cloud costs than they want to be on a monthly basis. Like, how are you managing your cloud costs today? Or like some type of open-ended question.
Imagine for a second that your prospects wash their cars like on the weekends. No matter what you sell, your prospect has a job they're trying to get done. So in this case, you have someone trying to wash their car. And no matter what you sell, people are getting the job done without you. No matter what you sell. Nobody's sitting around not using a bucket and sponge and all other kind of methods to wash their car. So the first thing we have to understand is, what job do people want to get done? And how are they getting it done today? From there, we have to have a hypothesis about the terrible, no good, very bad thing that happens if they keep using the current solution. So in this example, if someone is using one bucket and a sponge, the terrible thing that could happen is dirt can get trapped in the sponge, because the dirt settles to the bottom of the bucket. It's almost like if you put salt in water, you stir it, the salt settles to the bottom. The problem is when the dirt and the grit get on the sponge and you put that on your car, you can scratch it. Now, let's say you have a solution for that. It's called a grit guard. It actually goes into the bucket. It's almost like a little cheese grater, and you can rub your sponge on it, and the dirt settles to the bottom of the bucket and off your car. Now, when you make a cold call, you could say something like this. So, Chris, I know you like to wash your car on the weekends. Are you using one bucket or 2 buckets? And you might say, well, I'm using 1 bucket. And then you could simply say this. Oftentimes what we see when people use 1 bucket is the dirt settles to the bottom of the bucket and can get trapped in their sponge, which can scratch their car. how are you making sure that never happens when you wash your car? And then I'm just going to shut the front door and I'm just going to listen without having expectations. Now they may say, usually what you hear when you ask that question the right way and you nail it is you hear like a pause, because it's a hard question to answer. You're sort of poking the bear and they're like, I guess I just put it in the suds and hope the dirt comes off of it. Or what are you talking about? Like it's sort of a hard question. You're sort of making them think a little differently. And then from there, you might say, what's your opinion of a grit guard? And they might say, well, what is that? And now you've created an opening where they're leaning forward. Or they may say, yeah, I've heard of it. I just don't use it. To which you might say, sounds like you looked into it and the value wasn't there for you. Notice what we're not doing here. We're not pitching until someone says, well, what do you do? What are you selling? And then, and only then, we can give them a little teaser. Well, with the grit guard, it's a device you put in your bucket, and the dirt settles to the bottom of the bucket and off your car so you never scratch it. Well, how does that work? If you'd like, I can show you. Right? So we're not really, even when we're pitching, so to speak, we're giving a little tease. So we're creating curiosity. Your job is not to make cold calls. Your job is to pique curiosity. But it all starts with having a point of view as to the terrible, no good, very bad thing that happens if people continue washing their car with a bucket and sponge. And what I often see sellers do is pitching buckets to people that have buckets.
Yeah.
We have a better, shinier bucket. It's got more this, more that. And that's when you hear, I'm not interested. We have a vendor for that all the time, because you're selling solutions to people that already have solutions.
If you've been following along so far, we've talked about the intro, hook, and then close part of the cold calls. So this would be the hook. I think the number one bad piece of advice that I see, and I think it's coming from a good place on LinkedIn around cold calling, is to find problems, to ask about them. And there's definitely some merit to that. But if I'm speaking with you, Chris, a complete stranger, and I get you on the phone, how likely are you to open up with all of the problems going on in your business at that time? You're just not, to a complete stranger. I need to buy goodwill first. So the way that we start with the priority drop, that's going to be my first advice for you, is make sure that you're aligned with the priorities. Once someone says, yeah, reducing cost to serve right now is a really big focus, now I can start asking you about problems. But you know what I don't want to do? I don't want you to admit that you have a personal problem to me. I'm going to share problems that we hear that your peers have, and I'm just going to see if that resonates with you. It's easier for me to agree to a problem that all my peers have than to be like, yeah, business is not going well right now. Oh, wait, it's not going well for other coaches right now because of or whatever, that's easier for me to agree with. It would still be hard to agree with because of my pride. But that's going to sound something like this. The framework is called question stacking.
Okay.
So I'm going to stack context in front of my questions. So if we're using the contact center as an example, I'm not going to say, Chris, well, what's been the biggest challenge that you've had in getting customers to self-serve? Now you're going to be like, where do I start? There's so many places to go with that question.
Yeah.
And it's really high effort. It's high friction to answer. It's a lot of effort.
Yeah.
I want to reduce the amount of effort to respond. So I'm going to give an example. I'm going to say, Chris, one of the things that we hear from a lot of customers is that they rework those FAQ pages a bunch and a bunch and a bunch. And it ends up actually frustrating the customer more because they can't find what they're looking for and they just call into the contact center anyways. I'm really curious, how do you identify specific reasons that people try to FAQ and can't find the answer and end up calling in anyways? How do you find those reasons and diagnose them? Now we're getting really in the weeds with a very specific question that's easier to answer. And I'm also demonstrating expertise like a consultant in this case by talking about problems that other people have. So that's my advice, is you should know when you're reaching out to people, what problems does your solution solve for and what priorities do those align with? And I'm just going to say, I talk to a lot of people like you that share this problem. How do you deal with that? That's the basic framework. You're going to find that a lot of people are more open to answering that. I'll give you one more tip. The other tip is to don't be assumptive that they actually have the problem. So I can use wording like this and say, Chris, you've probably already figured this out, but I'm curious, when customers do try to self-serve on those FAQ pages and they can't find what they're looking for and they call into the contact center anyways, do you have a good way to identify like the reason that they call in? How would you find that? And I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. So, hey, you're probably already on top of this, or, you know, judging by your experience, you've probably already talked about this. You're probably already working out with your team, but I wanted to ask you about XYZ. And people are just so much more willing to open up to you when you give them the benefit of the doubt and don't insult their intelligence.
The next part is something I call a 3YU. And once again, I'm making this stat up because I'm not a data guy, but I would throw a dart at the dartboard and guess that like 90% of SDRs and AEs don't do this next part. And if I were to pick apart what allowed me to be successful with cold calls and like boil it down to one thing, like what made the biggest difference, what was the most needle moving thing you incorporated in your calls, it would be this. And it's having 3 distinct reasons why you are calling that person.
3 reasons.
3 distinct reasons. And they don't, sometimes you can't find like stuff to research on LinkedIn, so you can come up with stuff, you can get crafty with it. But I want that person to know that I'm intentionally calling them for a reason.
Yeah.
And the way I think about it too is like, if I'm on the receiving end of a cold call and someone has demonstrated that they've at least taken the time to know who I am to some degree, there's kind of like this reciprocal effect where like I feel like I now owe you a minute to explain why you're calling. So you would get your permission-based opener, right?
Yeah, go ahead. You got 15 seconds.
Or like, can I quickly explain why you're reaching out? Sure. It's like, awesome. I noticed your CEO recently published an article saying you're focused on the enterprise segment. I also saw you're actively hiring for 3 account executives. And third, and this is where I like to layer in my personalized email as part of my 3YU. Third, I shot you a really weird email about giraffes and how that ties back into tech sales. Based on all that, I'm really curious, like, are you familiar with Gong and what we do? So I have a different approach. I don't ask to pitch. I give 3 reasons why it's like, hey, let me make it clear why I'm calling you. I've done my research. Based on my research, I'm curious, like, do you know what we do? Are you familiar with what we do? It's kind of different. A lot of people don't like go that route. That's where I like to take it.
It makes it so warm though, and I'm all for that.
Yeah. And like, I think about a cold call as like this dance back and forth where I know where I want to go in that call, but I still want there to be like opportunities layered throughout the call where there's interaction as opposed to me just talking for 5 minutes. So that's why I'm like, hey, curious, are you familiar with what we do? I know I'm going to ask to pitch next, right? But I want to give them an opportunity to like respond. I want there to be dialogue and interaction back and forth.
So it's really about an opportunity to respond regardless of whether they know you or not? Or does your pitch that comes change based on if they're familiar or not?
They totally can, right?
Okay.
If they're like super familiar, that's going to be an entirely different follow-up than moral of the story.
Yeah.
I think feature dumping and pitching is really annoying.
Yeah.
So I want to have like a quick dialogue with them and then understand how I need to respond from that. So that's my structure. It's like, and I also want to emphasize, I am a big believer that the how is more important than the what in an opener. So it's less about the exact verbiage you use. It's more about how you deliver it. I think the theme here is like, I'm always thinking like, what's this other person thinking?
Yeah.
And if I'm getting cold called, I don't want to be on the phone. So you better sound like you want to be on the phone as the cold caller.
Yeah.
Like, how can you expect that person to be excited to talk to you if you sound like you are going through a list of 100 dials and it's monotonous and you don't want to be there? Yeah. Deliver it with conviction, have swagger. So, hey, can I quickly explain why I'm reaching out to you? Sure. Boom. Here are 3 reasons why. Curious. Are you familiar with what we do? Yes, no. And then you have an opportunity to ask to pitch. If you have one pitch, unless you're only calling one hyper-specific persona, then you're fumbling. How is one pitch supposed to land with a VP of sales versus a RevOps leader versus a CRO versus a frontline man? Like, there's no one thing that all those people care about equally. My pitch is hyper tailored to that persona based on the pain points and the challenges I know about them. If it's a sales leader, it is going to sound, there might not be a single piece of overlap in my Gong pitch for a sales leader versus a RevOps leader. It might not even sound like the same company when I'm talking about it, because their pain points and their struggles and their focuses are so different. So my pitch is very concise, it's very to the point, and it's very specific to that persona. Think about think about like a cold call funnel. Like, what is the average connect rate right now? I think it's like 3 to 5%. So you make 100 calls, you get 3 to 5 pickups. Of those, maybe you get 2 to 3 opportunities to pitch. Like, you've already you got a small amount of opportunities to book a meeting. If you finally get that opportunity and you're gonna then deliver a cookie cutter pitch, like, are you kidding me? You went through all of that funnel, you finally got the opportunity to pitch, and now you're gonna blow it because you have like one templated 2-paragraph long monologue that goes on for 4 minutes that nobody cares about. Like, no, you better be really sharp with your pitch because you don't get that opportunity that often.
So you get the opportunity with the CRO, and the pitch for the CRO is going to be different than other key personas that you might sell to.
Entirely
right?
different.
And so are you saying like, hey, we work with other CROs like yourself and we notice we're running into these specific challenges. This is where we come in and help, blah, blah, blah. We helped a similar CRO to you, a different company achieve this result. I'm putting some, projecting, but how do you pitch, let's say, to a CRO?
So ideal state, I've learned something about that person that gives me an inkling into what they're caring about. If not, I have to operate on a hunch. For a CRO, though, let's say, you got to think about, what does a CRO care about? Like, it's probably like big strategic goals.
Yeah.
Right? They don't care about like ramp time of my reps. They care about like, are we taking our messaging to market the right way?
Yeah.
What does our win rate look like? That kind of thing. Hopefully I've learned something about their company or them through my research that I can like zone in on. But if it's a CRO, it's like, hey, like I talk to CROs all day and they're typically hyper-focused on uplifting close rates, especially in this economy, ensuring that their reps are taking their messaging to the market the right way. And then maybe it's like a third thing. I'm curious, like of those 3 things, are any like hyper pertinent to what you're focused on right now? If you notice, I still haven't pitched. Still talked about Gong, but hopefully they give me an answer. And maybe it's like none of the above, whatever. But if they say one of those things, it's like, let's say they say with the win rate thing. Awesome. Like, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about Gong and what we do. I'm like 4 back and forth questions deep before I start pitching, like actually talking about my product. Because I don't think anyone likes products. I think people like solutions. How am I supposed to know a solution if I don't know your problem? I also want to recognize, like, it's hard to get to this point in a cold call.
Yeah, good point.
Like, you'll get hung up on, you're not going to get there every time. This recipe doesn't lead to the opportunity to pitch every time, but like, I think it fosters the most fruitful conversations.
It's a really good approach, man. And you're allowing the prospect to feel heard.
Totally.
And that is a gateway to connection. You're understanding them, and then you're understanding how you can very specifically tailor your pitch to what resonates and not talk about fluff that doesn't resonate at all.
Totally. And so maybe they're like, yeah, the win rate's like, oh, we're really focused on win rates or whatever. It's like, awesome, dude. Like, honestly, most sales leaders have such a hard time with this because you cannot be on every call. You've got a ton of reps spread across the country. It's almost impossible to understand like what the trends are between the deals you win and the deals you lose are. With Gong, you'll be able to use AI and data to surface the commonalities between the deals that convert to close won versus close loss. So you can scale that across the business and uplift your close rates at scale. Curious, does that feel like it'd be of value? Or how are you going about doing that today? Like the question's always
yes.
But like I've learned something about them. I've shown them why I'm calling them specifically. I've learned if they're familiar with what we do or if they're not. I've learned a little bit about what they care about, and now I can deliver something that's really personalized, and it's punchy, and it's short, and it's focused on that one thing.
Stories are integral to helping people not only understand, but be motivated to want to learn more. So by way of example, if someone were to ask you what you do, most sellers would look like a deer in the headlights, and they would give a very Ben Stein description of what they do. And what ends up happening when you do that is you put people into like a sleep-induced coma. But if you know how to tell a story, when someone asks what you do, you might say something like this. So, John, I know you have a team of 7 SDRs. You know how when they pick up the phone and they make cold calls, even if you have direct dials, every 50 calls, maybe if they're lucky, they have like 1 or 2 conversations. Most of the time, people just don't pick up. With our service, reps make the same 50 dials, but instead of having 1 or 2 conversations, they have 15 to 17 without you having to invest in any new technology. So that is a story-based approach for explaining what you do versus we have developed a service that allows you to optimize your cold call to connect rate by at least 35%, which is how most people would answer that question without a story.
Yeah.
The stories are the things that suck you in. Even as someone who teaches sales, you'll notice even in this podcast, most of my answers start with a story, right? They all start with some kind of a story. It's the story that pulls you in. So knowing how to be a good storyteller, I think is a superpower, certainly for teaching and also for selling. So imagine it's 2010.
Yep.
And you are selling iPods. Now in 2010, your viewers might be a little young to remember this, but like we talked about before, if you're going to be calling people that run with portable music players, nobody was sitting around doing nothing. They were using a Diamond Rio, a Nomad device, maybe a CD player. And so again, we have to understand how are people getting the job done today and have a point of view about what the problem might be with the current way. Now, I don't know if you remember this, Chris, but back in 2009, before the iPod, do you know what the potential problem was with traditional portable music players like the Creative Diamond?
I'm not sure, actually.
Okay, so back then, those devices only held 30 minutes of music.
Okay.
Now, that's not a problem if you only have 15 minutes of music. But if you're a runner like me and you ran for like an hour, what ended up happening was you have to listen to the same songs on repeat, or you would wait for that time to change out the music, which never happened because it was such a pain in the ass. So if I were to cold call you and I were to say, hey, Chris, my name is Josh. We've never met. Saw you running, familiar with you through the Boca Tri group. Do you got a second? Sure. So Chris, when you go running, are you using like a CD player, a Creative Nomad, or like a Diamond Rio? You might say, I'm using like a Diamond Rio. I might lean into that. That's a great player. They pretty much paved the way for portable music players. That dial makes it like really easy to switch tracks. What's been your take on it? We might stay there for a while, right? So there's no objection coming up here because I'm bringing it up, the quote unquote objection anyway. I'm bringing up that I'm going to presuppose that you're already using this. I'm going to take a guess. If not, they'll correct me. And then I'll say, what's your opinion of the iPod? Now, one of two things are going to happen here. They're going to be like, what is that? To which I'm going to say, well, with an iPod, you can run for 10 hours, not repeating the same songs with a 10-hour battery life. How does it work? If you'd like, I can show you. Or, yeah, I looked into the iPod. Oh, it sounds like the value wasn't there for you, right? So what I'm doing is I am bringing up the quote-unquote objections. Now, the word objection, I really have talked about this before. I don't like the word.
Okay.
I call it like resistance. Resistance is a natural part of the cold call. And when you hear the word objection, you think you have to overcome it. What I'm suggesting here is we're just going to bring it up proactively. So you will never hear we're using a vendor for that if you, at the beginning of the cold call, bring up the vendors. So Josh, most of the time when people use producing podcasts, they're using a couple tools like a StreamYard, Adobe Logic, and sometimes like a Headliner to promote it. What tools are you using to edit and promote your podcast today? I'm using X, Y, and Z. Oh, what's your opinion of the script? What is that? Well, with the script, you can edit podcasts like Word docs. So you don't have to go in there and edit waveforms. Well, what do you mean? How does it work? If you'd like, I can show you. Or, yeah, I looked into the script. Oh, sounds like it was too expensive for you. Well, it wasn't that. It was X. Well, yeah, I looked into the iPod and it wasn't for me because I have a Windows machine. And then you could say, well, that was the case, but now it's available on a Mac. Right? So again, it's coming from a place of curiosity and understanding rather than this approach of overcoming.
Once you physically deliver who you are, why you're calling, and then state your intent, which is to set aside time on their calendar, there's only 3 possible outcomes. Like literally once you physically get the words out of your mouth, there's 3 possible outcomes. The prospect could either immediately say, yeah, sure, I'm free next week. Thanks for reaching out. In which case, book the meeting. You don't have to overthink that one. The other option is they could give you a hard no, like, thanks, buddy, I'm all set. Take me off your list. Click. Like they don't even give you a chance. I call that a hard no, which you just make your next call. So 2 out of the 3 options you don't really need to prepare for. If they say yes, book the meeting. If they say no, just make your next call. So the only other outcome you need to be prepared for is an objection. And then if you're prepared for the most common objections, you can give yourself the best shot on net of overturning it and booking the meeting. And I literally recommend to people making flashcards of the most common objections. It amazes me that throughout school, like high school and college, we used to make flashcards for like relatively meaning biology tests, and we'd spend hours studying them so that when the term came up, we knew what to say. But when it comes to people's full-time careers, like something as simple as we already work with a competitor or something, because really like the I'd say like for most industries and most companies, like the top 5 objections are generally going to account for like 80% of the objections you receive.
Yeah.
So if you're prepared for those first, focus on coming up with good answers and rehearsing them. So like literally flashcard style, so that when you get them on the call, you immediately know what to say. And my technique for handling objections is to double down and sell time. So I think a lot of people jump into that. Let's use the one I just gave. We already work with a competitor. Their first initial thought is like, oh no, like now I got to outsell my solution compared to this competitor. And I got to start asking them questions like, how's that competitor going for you? And trying to like continue the conversation. I double down and sell the meeting. So if someone said, we already work with a competitor, I would say, got it. Yeah, that's actually why I was reaching out. We work with customers of X competitor all the time. So this is more just to get introduced and aligned going forward. If there's ever a fit, we can move ahead. But I think it at least makes sense to introduce you to the rest of our team and get aligned with your priorities going forward. So how does next week work? Or something like that, where you just act unfazed, but you know what to do immediately when you say it. And you'd be surprised. Like a lot of people will be, I don't know if it's subconscious, but they're surprised that you're just willing to double down like that. And it signals like you're serious and you were unfazed. And the key is you meet them at the end of their objection. And that's where being prepared comes in. You don't sound phased. You immediately know what to say. And you're going to give yourself another good shot on net. Now, if they still push back against that, that's when you can start asking some of those questions and trying to continue the conversation. But I always pull it back to selling time, because I want to be having this discussion on a discovery call when we have agreed upon time set aside. I haven't just interrupted them in the middle of their day. They're ready to listen, and I can properly prepare if you're an SDR, properly prepare for the meeting with your account executive. I'd rather be having this longer discussion on that call anyway. So I always go back to doubling down and selling the time.
We're all set, or we're getting this done, or we're using a better, can be a knee jerk, but it was also it can be a real objection as well, right? It's worth diving a little bit deeper into those as well. So again, I'm going to still follow the same framework where I acknowledge what they said. That's awesome to hear you've got this covered right now. That's fab. A lot of folks don't. May I ask, what are you using right now? How are you getting that done today? Okay, could you tell me a little bit more about that? What do you love about that?
Yes.
If I have my competitive intel down, I can ask. I like to compliment if they go, yeah, we're using PandaDoc, right? And I'm selling like DocuSign.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that's great. PandaDoc are a really awesome tool because, you know, they're free for up to 5 documents a month, and they've got a really friendly user interface. I'm curious though, how are you doing thing PandaDoc can't do, right? That's if I know my competitors really well.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I know that PandaDoc doesn't have I don't know, redlining functionality, and I sell DocuSign's document management solution that allows lawyers to go in and redline. I'm like, how are you handling it when folks want to make changes to your contract and redline them? And if I know PandaDoc doesn't have redlining functionality, boom, they go, oh, we have to download it, rip it off, put it in a Word doc, send that over, and go back and forth over it 20 times, and then put it back in PandaDoc. We've got problems. Let's talk about more about that. I'm a big fan of complimenting competitors as well. Like a lot of people hear competitor and they go straight to the battle card and things they don't do, or they ask what they don't like about it. Most people, I always throw in a compliment if I can, if I know.
Okay.
So I want to make them feel good, because they might be the person who bought that tool, right? You don't make them feel like an idiot for buying that thing as well. So I'm going to go, yeah, they're great for this, and they go, yeah, they are great for that. However, and then we move on to that problem, right? So it's almost like I'm stating fact, and then they are more likely to hear the question or the probe, which I go for next. Yeah. So no one has budget right now, but also like most people, Oracle's another exception, but most people aren't selling like must-have solutions as well. So like, for example, someone said, if I was calling on behalf of PandaDoc, let's say, they go, oh, we don't have budget. I'm like, yeah, most people don't peg a budget for freaking proposal software at the start of the year, right? Or if I'm selling for Chili Piper, and they go, well, we don't have budget for Chili Piper, or they go, oh, we don't have budget for Scratchpad. Like, yeah, no one sits down and starts, I'm like, yeah, you know what? We need to make sure we have 50 grand set aside for a tool that helps you update Salesforce, or a lead routing tool that allows sales reps to schedule with people, right? No one does that. So of course, they're not going to have budget, right? So what I want again is agree with them. And so you don't have budget right now, things get real tough. A lot of folks are even being told to cut back on tech and vendors. So again, I'm agreeing, and they're going, yeah, I'm being told about to cut back all day long. And then I can go into like, when you say you don't have budget, is that because like you just wouldn't ever be able to spend any money no matter what because your CFO would like chew you out for even suggesting thing? Or is it because you think right now, lead routing just is going so well that it wouldn't be worth investing in, would see minimal return? So I'm getting into like, again, I'm taking them down that route of, is that a real objection? Is it the case that you are stone cold broke and you will never ever be able to spend money anytime soon? Or is it, hey, I just don't see the value or the problem in what we're talking about here? And if that is the case, well, I don't really want to book a meeting with that person, frankly. If that genuinely is the case, now a lot of the time it isn't, which is then why I would follow up with a couple more questions to validate that. But if someone genuinely doesn't think, or if someone's really got an amazing, having a great time, nothing's going wrong with sending their contracts through PandaDoc, well, why would I want to meet with that person? It's not going to be a qualified meeting. They're not going to evaluate my tool if things are going amazingly. Now, the thing I see is 80% of the time, they're not. People say they are, and you got to get them there by asking the questions that make them go, huh, maybe we're not.
People say, okay, well, how do you compare to your competition? And I'll go, Chris, that's a great question. Would you like to hear what our most successful clients tell us when they compare us to the competition?
I would.
That's a script.
I love that.
And what prospect or customer doesn't want to be the most successful? Who's going to say, no, I don't want to hear what you have to say? And finally, on top of that, you're saying, here's what my customers tell me, not me. So I'm a third-party verification.
Or they're going to say something that sounds like an objection. Hey, I don't have any time right now. I really don't need that. We're all good. Like you said, when you call the CMO, we're all set. We already got AWS, right? They're going to give you something like that. And that's where you're going to earn your stripes. Like then I'm going to say, like the CMS, the CMS, I'm not sure like exactly what you said, but you might say, look, I fully expected you to say that. I knew that you were using AWS, and that's exactly why we should get together.
Ooh. That's exactly why. Yeah.
Because here are the reasons why companies like yours are making the shift. And I don't know if this would be a fit, but it wouldn't at least make sense for us to have a short conversation about your particular situation. How about we get together Thursday at 2? So the money happens at the objection.
Oh, Chris, you do it all in-house. Well, that's why I'm calling, because most of the people we talk to who do it in-house don't realize we can do this. How do you handle that problem? Oh, you're too busy right now? Well, that's why I'm calling. Nobody's really sort of expecting my call. How does later today at 2 work? Oh, you're using the competition? Well, that's why I'm calling. A lot of people who were with the competition didn't know that we could do this differently. And the key phrase to all of those is that's why I'm calling. Because I'm agreeing with them. You're right. You are doing it in-house. And who doesn't like someone who agrees with them? And the key for that is, 1, it's psychological. 2, it gives you a split second to figure out, well, what am I going to say after that's why I'm calling? This is why you need a script. You need to know exactly what to say if it's the competition. That's why I'm calling. Whenever someone tells me it's about the competition, they don't often realize blank. So 80% of that is the script. What comes after is, the other side. So that's why I'm calling is a great one. I'm going to interrupt you. Stop handling objections. You don't handle objections. Nobody wants to be handled. My wife does not want to be handled. My children don't want to be handled. Marinate in the objection. Spend time. Oh, what do you like about it? That's why I'm calling. Nobody knows this about us. So I'm marinating and agreeing with them about their objection. I'm spending a moment in their headspace. So stop handling objections. Not the, here's the big book of objections. Whenever they say the competition, here's what you say back. No, that's not what you do. You ask questions first, then you can say something back. So marinate in the objection.
So when your intent is to move things forward to get the result that you want, and when that's your intent going in, that's your mindset. What ends up happening is you say things that come across as pushy and manipulative because your thoughts affect what you say. It's biological. So it all starts with your intent. If your intent isn't to do that, if you detach from the outcome and seek to see if there might be a fit and be okay if there isn't, and you're sort of leaning back and you're indifferent, your behavior sounds more relaxed and chill, which is more appealing to prospects because they don't feel the push. By way of example, in the sales training example, is the prospect said, hey, we're thinking about doing this training in-house using our managers. And I said, can I share some things for you to consider so that you can make that decision? They go, sure. I go, so often what I see when managers do training, because they don't have a degree in instructional design, is they will vomit PowerPoint presentations at new sailors. So you'll see these 60, 70, slide presentations. I call it sort of drinking by fire hose. How are you going about structuring the material in a way that can be digestible? Something else I see is that oftentimes people don't have instructional aids that they leave behind. Things like, a cold call talk track that's like affixed to the monitor. And so what ends up happening is sometimes the learning doesn't stick. What's your opinion about using aids? And are you guys incorporating that into your training? So we're asking questions that are illuminating potential, not problems, but potential problems in the current way. I had a general contractor do this to me just recently with my house. Yeah. I said to him, you're not the cheapest option. And he said, I'm not. Can I ask you just a couple questions? I go, sure. Just so you're comparing apples to apples. Are they using Redgate as a moisture barrier for your floor? Are they using hollow doors or hollow doors? Or solid doors or hollow doors for the interior of your house? Are they using your existing 15-year plumbing, or are they giving you guys new copper pipes? So they're not pitching anything. Yeah. What they're doing is they're illuminating potential problems that make you scratch your head and think, I'm not sure. And now I'm leaning forward and thinking, I don't know, let me look into that. Versus, let me tell you why I'm worth bringing in as a sales trainer. Let me tell you why I'm worth a general contractor. Of course, you're going to say that you're biased. Someone says your price is too high. The traditional sales approach is to defend the price. Well, a lot of people felt that way, but what they found was because we are the best in category, we have a 2x ROI within 2 years, rather than your price is too high. And you might simply say in a very calm way, sounds like you are comparing this to something you already bought or something that you're looking at. You want to make sure you are not spending your money or overpaying for something that you can get for far less money. It seems like there's a ceiling to what you want to pay. Seems like you've been shopping around a little bit a long time, right? And so what you'll find when you sort of what I call join the resistance is there's no resistance because there's nothing to fight here. So anytime someone comes at you with a different political view, which happens a lot nowadays. I mean, I see it at dinner all the time. Someone has a different political view, even with the Palestine-Israel thing. This came up last night. Someone had a different view than me. I didn't push back. I said, it sounds like you read that somewhere. It sounds like you have a reason for saying that. Where'd you get that? Where'd that from? So the default is to understand without necessarily having to agree with. And what you'll find when you do develop that skill is when you make people feel heard, they're more likely to hear you.
When you hear it, you uncover a legitimate pain point that you can help with. how do we tie a nice bow on locking in that next meeting in a way that's tactful?
Yeah, so I'm going to share a concept. It's called shift versus support. And this is from a book called You're Not Listening, written by a woman named Kate Murphy. This is assigned homework from my wife.
Oh,
Yeah, the general concept is that, so like when that executive said that we had this problem, your gut is to shift the focus of the conversation onto yourself. That's what human nature is,
it was
right?
so bad, so bad.
Anytime we hear something that's remotely related to us, we think about how it relates to us. We do this every single day. I do it. Everyone's guilty of it. What
Okay,
we actually need to do. Oh, go ahead.
I have to stop you. I did have an ex-girlfriend that actually told me all the time I was making things about me. And I was like, I'm trying to relate. No, you know what? This is a personal issue, but
Yeah,
you
this is like a
you
therapy session, dude.
illuminated- I need to read this book. Anyways.
Yeah, it's really good. I would just, she's got great interviews too. She's a very fun interviewee.
Yeah.
So shifting the focus onto yourself is not what you want to do in that moment. I want to support. I want to lean in. So when someone says, yeah, we don't really have good analytics in place to be able to follow the user experience from the FAQ page into the contact center and like why they call. So instead of saying, oh, I'm so glad I called you, we can totally help you with that, I say, oh, tell me a little bit more about that. How's that affecting the cost to serve right now? What else have you guys tried? I want to get them talking a little bit more. So I love the framework TED. It's tell, explain, describe. I didn't come up with that. I don't know who came up with it. Hey, tell me a little bit more. So get them talking. So the hook is, I know I'm ready to close and ask for the meeting when I have something that they've talked about. I have a problem that they've shared that our solution can help with. The way I'm going to transition and tie a bow, to use your wording there, is I'm simply just going to summarize what I heard. I find that people find this transition to be a little awkward. I'm just going to say, Chris, thanks for sharing. So what I heard right now is that reducing cost to serve, really big focus for you. You don't really have a way to track reasons why people call into the contact center, and that's something that you really want to figure out. I'm really glad I called you because that's what we helped XYZ customer do. They were trying to drive down cost to serve, didn't know why people were calling in, and we helped them figure out some of those reasons so they could drive down the contact center volume. Can I make a quick suggestion? And usually you get an awkward response. They're like, yeah.
Sure. That's what I would say.
Yeah. How about we set aside some time when I'm not calling you randomly in the middle of the day? We can unpack this and I can share some of those insights with you. Do you have your calendar handy? I'm going to go straight into scheduling the meeting. That's how I transition. I'm just going to summarize in a sentence or two what I heard, share a quick customer story, 2 sentences, someone else that you've helped, and then I'm going to ask for time. Going to transition right into asking for time.
So once you feel like you have a strong pain point, a reason for them to meet, what I generally do is I give a recap. So I'll say, all right, so what I've heard so far is, and you sort of repeat their challenge to them, and you've tried X, Y, and Z. Why don't we do this? Which is, by the way, my favorite way to ask for a meeting is recap. Why don't we do this? That's my favorite phrase. It's super smooth. It's non-pushy. And I go, why don't we do this? Let's set aside some time. We'll walk you through how we've helped other founders solve X challenge. How about tomorrow at 3:00? Just give them a time. So what's interesting about it is you're saying, why don't we do this? Which is very soft. Why don't we do this? Blah, 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 blah. But you're giving them a time. So you're being assumptive. And since you're leading into that assumptive with a reason why you think this is the right thing to do, because you're recapping, and then you're being soft by saying, why don't we do this? It's very collaborative. And then a best practice is to be assumptive, which is a more aggressive technique. You're very balanced in your ending, and it doesn't feel like you've turned from this question asker, thoughtful conversationalist into some shark salesperson. It flows very naturally. That's why I like doing it.
Final thing on cold calling is closing to set the meeting.
Yes, dude.
Let's set the meeting.
Dude, I realize I've come up with a bunch of random terms like 3YU. So I have an approach to closing cold calls that I call the 1 + 1 = 2 method.
I love your these are awesome. You got to trademark them, man. But,
I do, dude. I'm actually like genuinely a nerd about this stuff. I think about it outside of work too often. It is rare that you get to the point in a cold call where you have a chance to close. Right? Like so much has had to go right at that point. And I feel like what happens to a lot of SDRs is We have a healthy conversation with a prospect. And as soon as it comes time to ask for the meeting, it's like we completely forget all the value we just delivered. And now we're asking a favor of the prospect. Like the amount of cold calls I hear where it's like, hey, like, could you and my AE meet for like, I'll buy you lunch. Like what, it's a very like soft and passive and kind of selfish ask. And I made this mistake a lot early as an SDR. I want to have this epiphany in a cold call that I call the 1 + 1 = 2 method. The first one is I've discovered a problem that this person is dealing with. The second one is there's something I know my product or service can do to help that. And the two is this epiphany of like, oh my gosh, maybe we should talk about this more. So it might sound like, and this is how I would typically structure it, is like, hey, like, can I be honest here? Sure, go ahead. Notice how I'm doing permission. I get permission all throughout the cold call.
You're keeping them in control.
Totally.
Yeah.
They're like, sure. Like, you just told me like you're having a really hard time understanding why you're losing deals. Gong actually can help you do that by X, Y, and Z. Like, based on that, I think it actually makes a ton of sense for us to set aside like 45 minutes and actually show you what that might look like. Like, does that sound totally crazy to you? But I want the prospect to feel like I came to that call without a preconceived notion that I'm going to ask for a meeting. And instead it's like, oh my God, like I learned this thing and I know we do this thing. Like 1 + 1 = 2, like maybe we should meet about this. But I want it to feel like I didn't come into that call already 100% decided that I'm going to try to book a meeting with you. It's like, whoa, dude, like you just told me this. I know this. Like, let's do this.
Wow.
And I think it's really powerful. And this is super applicable to AE roles too, like getting the next steps and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so you came in detached from the outcome, but literally seeking to understand, and the customer, the prospect, the future customer understands that.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, they're like, oh, he actually went through this discovery process and wasn't coming in like thinking I'm going to set a meeting no matter what. You didn't have like a transactional
and obviously
forcing
you
mindset.
go into it hoping to set
I mean,
a
you do
meeting.
want, yeah.
Like obviously deep down, you're like, you want to set the meeting. You probably
No one went
know.
into a cold call not wanting to set the meeting.
Right. But I think it just comes off so much better when it's just this like 1 + 2, 1 + 1 = 2 method. Another example, like I'm a RevOps leader and like my reps are terrible entering data into Salesforce. I know that Gong can auto-populate that data into Salesforce for you. It's like, hey, like you kind of just told me how like you got this very, very real challenge around like data hygiene. I'm a rep. I'm terrible at it. I'm not surprised to hear this. Like Gong actually takes that off your plate by automating that process for you and your reps. I think it would actually be really impactful if you saw what that looked like. Would love to set up some time to do that. Like, is that an unfair ask? Like, it's this very genuine, like, you just told me this, I know this. And I think if I'm to distill this down, like, why would that person want to meet? Why would they want to take an hour out of their day to learn more? It's not for you to get a validated meeting. It's not for the free $20 Grubhub gift card that you're going to offer. Like, what is in it for them, and close with that at the forefront. Like, I think you could benefit a lot from this. It's natural for us to set up a next step around that.
I'm sold. I want some Gong, man.
It's
Maybe for next Christmas.
One of two things will trigger me to try and book a meeting. It's number one, I've identified a challenge that I know is sticky enough that we can help solve, and they seem to care about it. And you can hear that in their voice. You can hear them when they're talking about it. So let's say someone goes, yeah, damn, that redlining thing is a pain in the ass. I might go a little bit further just to really kind of get it going, but not too far, because we don't go into discovery call territory here, especially not if you're in SDR, because there's the risk that you can talk yourself out of a meeting. So once you hear that challenge and it's obviously something they care about, go, hey, here at DocuSign, we offer a contract lifecycle management platform designed for exactly that. Would you be curious enough to check out, this in a bit more informal context when we're not cold calling out the blue here? And then boom, great. How does Tuesday work at 2 p.m.? Now, the other side of things is if they talk about the problems, they naturally almost want to go, why? What have you got? And then you can do that same line. If they start asking you questions, you can go, hey, I can walk you through all of this. It sounds like you have some questions. Why don't we book a call in, let's say, Is tomorrow too soon? And I can actually show you what other companies are doing to accomplish that. One of those two things: challenge, or they're asking you questions about your tool. Use that interest, because now if they're asking you questions, you've done the job of getting them interested. Book the call.
Because you got something done, your confidence is up. You got the energy. Like, don't go Cadillac around the bases after you set an appointment, SDRs. Get back on the phone and leverage that energy. It's like, come on, somebody answer the phone. Like, let's go.
Yeah, come on, let's get fired up. Let's hear some chatter on the sales floor. I love that nuance that you said there, is ride the high when you get the meeting and turn that momentum into more momentum. In my day-to-day, I'm booking meetings, but my show rate is not the best. Would I use a similar pitch to get them committed to attend?
A little bit. So there's a couple of things on the show rate, and there's a couple of ways. So I teach the respect contract. So there's digital and verbal. So we went through the verbal respect contract, right? So digitally, yes, you send the calendar invite. Yes, you can put the agenda in the calendar if you want, but I don't know. I never read the agenda till the thing pops up. What I also do is I have an email, and it's a template that says, hey, Chris, and the subject line is proposed agenda for discussion. And then it says, hey, Chris, looking forward to chatting. Here's the proposed agenda. Please let me know if there's something you'd like to add. It's going to be introductions. It's going to be understanding your world, explaining what we do, and then determining if there should be next steps. That's the first meeting of everybody. That's everybody's first meeting, right? And then for me, I'll say, and by the way, I ask everybody these questions. Hey, at the end of a sales training, you'll know it was successful because we've helped the team get better at blank, blank, and blank. What fills in those blanks for you? Looking forward to chatting, Richard. So now this email that I send gets about a 94% open rate, probably a 28% response rate. And then I will probably go and connect with them on LinkedIn. So now all of a sudden, 3 things are in their inbox: the calendar invite, this proposed agenda. Who doesn't open an email that says proposed agenda, right? And then this LinkedIn thing, which never gets sent to spam as best I can tell. So now there's 3 things within a few minutes or maybe an hour or so going to their inbox to reinforce. Right? So that's one thing. And then again, Stephen, everybody's got that if you like sending the the email 24 hours ahead or 2 hours ahead or something like that. I have no statistics to this. The 24-hour ahead is okay, but I'm ADHD, so I kind of see it and forget it. 2 hours ahead is probably really good for Richard. For me, if I see it about 2 hours ahead, that doesn't even mean I see it all the time too, because I'm busy. But but there's no math to that. There's no science behind my suggestion. It's a Richardism. I just don't know, how often people see those. And if you're selling to IT and technical people, on the one hand, they might be so busy they never check their email. On the other hand, they might read every single email that comes through, or at least glance at it.
I hope you guys enjoyed this video, you got value, and you're fired up to make more cold calls, build more pipeline, and put more cash in your pocket. If you did enjoy the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more videos like these designed to help you start and grow your tech sales career. If you're serious about transitioning into tech sales for the first time, check out my in-depth interview with Kyle Coleman, who interviewed and hired hundreds of SDRs. This video is power-packed, and some people have even said that the video is worth $20,000, which is the cost of some boot camps that help you break into tech sales. And if you're someone who's a true tech sales dreamer and you want to know what it takes to join the 7-Figure Earners Club, you want to understand the art of the possible, then check out my interviews with Ian Cognac and Brandon Fluharty, who both made 7 figures a year respectively at Salesforce and LivePerson. These guys are the best of the best, and you're going to love these interviews. And finally, I want to point you to my own resources linked in the description of this video, and those include my newsletter and my collection of 8 courses Tech Sales Accelerator. Just by subscribing to my Sell More, Live More newsletter, you're going to get free cold calling scripts, a 90-day SDR success plan, an interview checklist, and a free mini negotiation course. And man, I put 2 years into building my collection of 8 courses, Tech Sales Accelerator, and it's going to give aspiring tech sellers the complete blueprint to find great tech companies to apply to, understand how to earn interviews, interview masterfully, land their dream job, and then have a blueprint to get promoted from SDR to account executive within a year to join the 6-figure earners club. Feel welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and we can set up a one-on-one conversation where I want to learn about your personal goals and I can answer your questions myself so you can decide if the program's a good fit for you. I appreciate you guys showing up today. Thanks for your time and attention and for investing in your personal and professional development to your success in tech sales and in life. Happy selling and happy living, and we'll see you in the next one.